FPS Win. Written by
嘟嘟雪球
Chapter 234. For Pubei, equipment like bulletproof vests is absolutely 100% hard currency, because it is a life-saving weapon on the battlefield, the armor of a modern army, and the key to a light infantry unit's real combat effectiveness. In fact, this is easy to understand. In ancient times, a fully armored soldier could defeat dozens or even hundreds of unarmored targets. It was even exaggerated to the point that privately hoarding armor was tantamount to rebellion. This has already illustrated the importance of protection to some extent. After entering the era of hot weapons, the importance of armor has shown a spiral upward trend. In the era of full-power bullets, due to the relatively backward material technology, bulletproof vests have limited defense against bullets. Those that are too light cannot block them, and those that are too heavy cannot move people. Therefore, basically all mainstream armies generally do not use bulletproof vests. But after World War II, as full-power bullets were gradually eliminated and intermediate-power bullets became popular, and thinner Kevlar materials appeared, bulletproof vests began to narrow the gap in the conflict. By the 21st century, various new lightweight bulletproof materials have become popular. With the addition of special steel, silicon carbide, boron carbide polyethylene, FIM, and pyrolytic carbon material technologies, bulletproof vests have become capable of fighting even under the strafing of large-caliber full-power bullets. But at this stage, bulletproof vests cannot be said to have completely won the battle of contradictions, because it is too expensive, so expensive that even most regular armies cannot use it on a large scale. Chen Chen was particularly impressed by this. At that time, there were several very classic questions on the internet. First, how many J-8s can shoot down one F-22? The second question is whether the Variag can be launched. Third, how can we fight if we can't even afford bulletproof vests? Each of these three questions could trigger a hundreds-page-long forum war of words. Even though Chen Chen couldn't join in due to his status, he still got to watch all the fun. The third question is particularly classic. Every time someone raises it, it will inevitably extend to a series of interesting topics such as yellow face basins, liberation shoes, new military uniforms, 95 guns, etc., and these topics will eventually lead to the same answer. That is, the army poor. That's right, at that time, bulletproof vests really were the representative of high-tech, and the cost of a single piece was as high as thousands of dollars, which was simply not something that the country's army could handle. This can be seen from the fact that the Dongfeng Corps had to work very hard to get 4 level 4 bulletproof vests. However, this situation was completely broken in 2008. Because it was in this year that Yijing Chemical Fiber Company used dry spinning technology for the first time to carry out industrial production of ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene fibers, and the offensive and defensive situation suddenly turned. Less than 10 years later, the product of bulletproof vest was completely dethroned and became a common item on civilian shopping websites, where you could buy a set for even 500 yuan. And it's 500 renminbi. Of course, it is only 2010 now. Although the technological breakthrough has been achieved, large-scale production has not yet been realized, and the price of bulletproof vests is not as exaggerated as it will be in the future. But as far as Chen Chen knew, even if it was not exaggerated like this, it was actually enough to meet Pubei's current needs. If a civilian export route for bulletproof vests can be opened from the north to Pubei, it means that the Dongfeng Corps will no longer have to worry about the source of heavy bulletproof vests, and may even have an additional stable source of income. Therefore, Chen Chen had already planned it out early on. If he could establish his own business route, the first business he would do would be bulletproof vests. But the idea is good. How to implement it is a problem. It's a little too early. Unlike in the future when any company producing travel bags will be able to set up a production line to produce bulletproof vests. In this era, the production of special equipment such as bulletproof vests is still concentrated in the hands of a few companies. It is easy to buy them in the country in the north, and an individual can just go there with money and buy a lot. But if you want to export them in large quantities, the procedures are still quite complicated. Chen Chen couldn't send anyone to the north to wait and talk slowly, so he had to take a shortcut, and this shortcut had to start with Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu naturally understood what he meant, and after just a few simple exchanges, the two basically reached a consensus. Listening to Chen Chen talking about how to help Jihua open up the Southeast Asian market, how to use real-life battle examples to promote Jihua bulletproof vests, and how to rely on cheap productivity and cheap raw materials in the north to impact the monopoly of international protective equipment, Xiaoyu couldn't help but say with some amusement, "Xinchuan, how come I remember you were just a mercenary group? It's only been a short time, and you're already thinking about the international market?" Chen Chen chuckled and replied, "You don't understand. A soldier who doesn't want to be a general is not a good soldier. Although our scale is still relatively small, we will eventually move towards professionalization and formalization. Since we have to take that step sooner or later, we must prepare early. Don't mention that some of these are sold out. Can you help me contact the source of supply? In theory, this shouldn't be a difficult task, and it wouldn't even involve any sensitive issues. All I need is a contact person." After hearing Chen Chen's words, Xiaoyu hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Are you sure it's okay? I'm not very familiar with foreign trade, especially when it comes to these sensitive factors." "I correct you again, this is not a sensitive factor." Chen Chen interrupted Xiaoyu and explained, "Trust me, go ask your people now, and after you contact Jihua 3523, tell them you will help them expand the market. I guarantee they will do their best to sell the goods to you. This is a win-win deal. To be honest, I can do it without you, but it will take more time and cost more unnecessary money. How about giving it a try?" "Then give it a try." Xiaoyu finally gave in, and Chen Chen on this side also felt relieved. He was really afraid that Xiaoyu would be bitten to death for some unspeakable reason without providing any help. If that was the case, he would have to go through various complicated channels to contact the manufacturers in the north. It's not that it's impossible, it's just too slow and a waste of resources. Fortunately, Xiao Yu, who came from the intelligence field and was often sent abroad for work, did not have many pedantic habits. She probably knew the harm of internal friction better than herself. So, the matter was settled. Xiao Yu was responsible for finding someone to make the connection, while I had to prepare the legal and compliant procedures and receive the goods as soon as possible after the source of goods was prepared. Before hanging up the phone, Xiao Yu warned again. Sunken, remember, no matter from which angle, this is just a normal business transaction. Whether it succeeds or not, it does not represent our attitude. We are just a middleman who happens to provide information that can facilitate transactions. We will not gain any benefits or provide any convenience in the middle. That is to say, after the contact person is given to you, all the work has nothing to do with us. Don't worry, Chen Chen answered firmly. I said, even if I don't look for you, I will look for someone else. But it's actually safer to put this business under your control, isn't it? That's true. The little fish answered thoughtfully, and then said, that's it, do what you should do. We'll meet again soon. If you have any questions, we can talk in person. With a click, the phone was hung up. A smile appeared on Chen Chen's lips, and then he immediately called Su Yu and began to arrange a series of business matters. In fact, for Chen Chen, doing business itself was not very meaningful. He doesn't have much pursuit for money, material things, and the like. The reason why he wants to make money is that his most core demand is still to be concentrated on equipment. What's the point of money? No matter how much money you have, how luxurious your car is, or how exquisite your villa is, can it withstand a 120mm mortar? What? You said it can withstand it? What about the 155-meter-high dungeon? The profound understanding of destruction did deprive him of some interest to some extent. But on the other hand, only such understanding could allow him to eliminate unnecessary interference as much as possible and survive in this chaotic land. However, 2 days later, when the first BOQ quotation sheet of Jihua Group was placed on Chen Chen's desk, he still truly felt the impact brought by the pure profit. Not only him, but everyone in the core group of the Dongfeng Corps, including Su Yu, was shocked by the quotation. Su Yu stared at the quotation in amazement, ran his index finger over the numbers on it, and then said in disbelief, is this thing real? A Kevlar bulletproof vest, plus 4 levels of ceramic bulletproof plates. The total price is only $0.2460 US. Are you kidding me? I've sold 2 bulletproof vests of the same level before. Even if they were purchased on the legal market, the price would be more than $4,000. If they were shipped to Pubei, the conservative estimate would be $15,000. Now you tell me this thing is less than 1/5 of the price. Forget about the price. There is no upper limit on the supply quantity. Is the supply cycle calculated in days? And it uses the CIP terminology. It even includes the freight. I feel like this is a scam, and they may not be able to deliver the goods at all. But that's impossible. I know that the Jihua Group is a state-owned enterprise. If they break the contract and fail to deliver the goods, it will have a major impact on their reputation, right? I have to say that Su Yu is quite professional in trade. Although he had previously been involved in various illegal transactions, it did not mean that he did not understand the rules of legal transactions. And in just a few words, he did point out the unreasonable aspects of the quotation. Super low prices, loose delivery terms, and unlimited supply. In his opinion, this is not doing business, it's simply doing charity. The perception of other people was similar to his. Even after seeing the quotation, Bai Go couldn't help but feel that this was some kind of transaction similar to helicopter. After getting Chen Chen's negative answer, he was completely confused. Looking at their expressions, Chen Chen couldn't help but shook his head. How far has this come? The strength of the manufacturing powerhouse has just begun to show. Wait a few years and you will see that drones worth $500, bulletproof vests worth $200, radios worth $20, and carrying gear worth $5. All those things that were once high and mighty will be completely dethroned, and those who can seize the opportunity of the first round of impact will all make a fortune without exception. Thinking of this, Chen Chen said, there is no doubt about the authenticity. Although this business looks a bit exaggerated, it is actually special. The factory that supplies us is having some operational difficulties, and they are in urgent need of opening up the international market and forming new sales channels. Under the premise that brand influence has not yet been established, playing the low-price card is the safest and most reliable solution. So Su Yu, just go ahead and do it boldly. Now tell me, with the trade routes and transportation capabilities you control, how many bulletproof vests can you bring back for me in the first batch of purchases? Hearing Chen Chen's question, Su Yu hesitated for a moment, then replied, in theory, we can handle any amount. According to the strategy in the quotation, we will complete customs clearance in Xiamengla. This trade route is relatively mature and safe, and the inland transportation can be directly transported by large trucks. The main problem we face is still a sales channel problem. We can spend $10 million to buy 5,000 bulletproof vests, but who should we sell these 5,000 bulletproof vests to? We can't buy it for $2,000 and sell it for $2,000. We have to sell it for at least $10,000. That means that this is a large order of $50 million. Even if it is spread across the markets of northern Shan State and Hua State, it is unlikely to be fully consumed. So my suggestion is to test the waters with 1,000 units first? No problem. Chen Chen immediately nodded and said, just 1,000 units, and we need to screen the sales targets. In the early stages, we only sell to partners who are absolutely unlikely to come into conflict with us in the short term, such as Hua State, the 7th Brigade, and Chaisri. We don't even want to give them Muguay. We are going to use a hunger marketing campaign against them. We want to let them know that those who cooperate with us will become stronger and stronger, while those who oppose us will only become weaker and weaker. Clear? Su Yujing nodded and continued. Then I will send them a reply letter. Order 1,000 sets first. Go ahead and do it. Chen Chen waved his hand, and Su Yu immediately retreated. A few hours later, the first advance payment was transferred through international settlement to the account of a company far north of the Tropic of Cancer. That evening, the company's sales staff celebrated together, and the production line in the factory was running at full capacity, working overtime to start production. It won't be long before the first batch of equipment arrives in Pubei and Mengyang. This will definitely have an unstoppable impact on the entire Pubei, because in a light infantry battle, the side wearing level 4 armor will have an overwhelming advantage. There is no logical advantage. After that, the entire battlefield ecology of Pubei will begin to change. The driving force behind all this was currently sitting in an inconspicuous office in Mengyang County, thinking about how to use this batch of equipment to mobilize as much power as possible to launch an attack on that important town, Jingdong. The end of the Shadow Legion is approaching, but they don't even know that what will defeat them is not some super advanced, super powerful equipment. It is more likely that she is a rural female worker in northeast China thousands of kilometers away, wearing reading glasses, stepping on the pedal of a sewing machine, and earning only $3 an hour. Mengyang's affairs were basically arranged, but Chen Chen did not return to Mengkao immediately. After determining what Hua State was going to do and what their attitude would be, he had to ask Bao Xiaomei to give him a more detailed plan so that he could carry out his deployment smoothly. The discussion process did not take him too much time. After all, the issues involved were not complicated. In a few simple words, the evidence at hand was used as an introduction to establish the motive for the action and to demonstrate the justice of Hua State's participation in it. Then, more detailed information was used to limit the boundaries of the matter, indicating that the action was only aimed at a part of corrupt military officers and drug dealers, and to separate the matter from the so-called ZZ War as much as possible to avoid a larger-scale conflict with the Myanmar side. Finally, according to the interest chain that has been sorted out, we will find a way to reach an agreement with the Myanmar top leaders and sort out a hidden line of cleaning up the house. In this way, the entire action is reasonable and feasible from every aspect. It has to be said that this combination of punches is quite powerful. Even if Chen Chen looks at it from a macro perspective of the future, he can't find too many faults. But the question is, why does he feel that this plan is so familiar? When Peng Deering came back to power, he followed this process, didn't he? Advanced experience is really being promoted everywhere. No wonder Xiaoyu didn't jump out to object. However, Chen Chen also keenly saw a hint of disharmony in Bao Xiaomei's or Hua State's plan. Looking at Bao Xiaomei opposite him, he frowned and asked, "So, the key to this plan is that Bangxiong must be able to defeat the Jingdong garrison. Moreover, we have to quickly capture this important town that even has an airport, given that the 505th Brigade is likely to support Jingdong. Don't you think this is a bit exaggerated? Bangxiong has less than 4,000 people at most, and there are nearly 5,000 Burmese troops in Jingdong. Although some of them are police battalions, they are still armed combat forces after all. Early confrontations and sieges are fine. But isn't it pure bullshit to really conduct large-scale urban warfare?" Hearing Chen Chen's words, Bao Xiaomei nodded solemnly and then said, "This is the biggest problem we are facing. The operation against King Tung cannot be a simple one. It will inevitably become a protracted war. But we don't intend to engage in urban street fighting. What we want is a city, not a piece of land. So our goal is to divide the Myanmar army, cut off the connection between King Tung and other areas, completely complete the blockade of King Tung, and finally complete negotiations with the Myanmar army on the condition of blockade. So, the one you really want to fight is the 505th Brigade?" Chen Chen keenly guessed Bao Xiaomei's intention. In fact, it was not that difficult to guess. It was just a classic strategy of surrounding a point and attacking reinforcements. "That's right." Bao Xiaomei nodded and continued. "Siege, blockade, small-scale annihilation, and then a large-scale decisive battle with the reinforcements. This is the whole picture of the whole plan. It's very difficult. We don't have enough troops, and we are attacked from both sides," Chen Chen said in a serious tone. "If there is even the slightest deviation in the scale, the Burmese army is likely to mobilize fully and fight a war with you at all costs. Moreover, Hua State cannot send troops directly, and other forces in southern Shan State cannot participate. If we rely solely on Ho Bang Sung, will he fight with his head? Either he will be involved in the 7th Brigade, or he will have to expand the army. Whether there is money to expand the army is still a question. Even if it is expanded, the combat effectiveness will not exist. Then we still have you." A meaningful smile emerged on Bao Xiaomei's face. This smile did not contain compliments, but rather a kind of confidence that I believe you can do it. In a sense, this is a recognition of the Dongfeng Corps and a very high evaluation. But Chen Chen was not complacent at all. He just shook his head calmly and replied, "Our team is not designed for frontal combat. There is no conspiracy or trickery in large-scale combat. It is a complete confrontation of tactics, equipment, numbers, and tactical levels. If you want us to pin down the enemy's large forces, then I can only say that it is completely wishful thinking. Why? Don't you have many cases where you defeated the majority with a small force?" Bao Xiaomei's doubts were not fake. She probably really thought that a small team of the Dongfeng Corps had the ability to wipe out a team of several hundred people from the local armed forces. That was because the attack on Hongyan was special. It was a decapitation after a large-scale penetration. Chen Chen was completely speechless. He was too lazy to explain to Bao Xiaomei, so he said, "You should let someone more professional talk to me about this. Anyone who has led troops knows what I mean." "Understood. But it doesn't matter. We don't really intend to let you go to the front line. As you said, we will eventually let the 7th Brigade participate. However, they must first submit a pledge of allegiance, or in other words, an admission ticket. You want them to eliminate the Burmese troops in Mengku?" "That's right," Bao Xiaomei answered frankly, and at this point, the entire subsequent battle plan had become clear. Before the battle in Jingdong began, the 7th Brigade must first put pressure on the Myanmar army in Mengku near Mengka and seize control of the area around Mengka. Subsequently, the 7th Brigade will join forces with the Bangxiong's 756th Brigade to strengthen the siege of Jingdong and force the Burmese army in other areas to mobilize support. At that time, no matter whether it is the Burmese army or the 505th Brigade, the alliance team must defeat them in exchange for bargaining chips and use this bargaining chip to exchange for control of Jingdong. The military always serves the government, and this statement is absolutely true. Even in Pubei, a place where warlords abound and military force is supreme, it is impossible to deviate from this basic principle. However, Chen Chen was very skeptical. Could the Bao family really settle the matter after the war? He asked Bao Xiaomei his question. This time, Bao Xiaomei did not make any frivolous promises to him. Instead, she said seriously, "No one can guarantee where the final result will go. We just want to seize this perfect opportunity and give it a try. I think you understand the significance of Jingdong. If we can take Jingdong, the situation in Pubei will change qualitatively. With this important town, we can completely open up the channels to the outside world. From Jingdong to Tachalike, many things can be shipped in and many things can be shipped out. Everyone will benefit, except Burmese. Of course, if you think the prospects are unclear, you can choose not to participate. But I still want to say that this is our common goal. If you don't participate, then you won't be able to participate in the distribution of spoils in the future." Chen Chen nodded slowly and said almost without hesitation, "We will participate." What a joke. Not to mention that fighting is the fate of mercenaries. Even if we don't consider other so-called overall situations, the fact that they can take over Jingdong and completely eradicate the Shadow Legion is enough for the Dongfeng Legion to take action. However, the mercenaries' fighting is different from that of Hua State and the 7th Brigade. The interests of the Dongfeng Corps must be mentioned first. What benefits can we get? Chen Chen asked. Hundreds of millions of dollars in commissions, a complete trade route from Tachalike to Jingdong and Mengka, a more stable living environment, and help from Hua State when the subsequent battle against Kachin begins. It's reasonable and can be done. Then, happy cooperation? The two stretched out their hands and held them together. Bao Xiaomei was reluctant to let go, but kept stroking the back of Chen Chen's hand with her thumb. Chen Chen calmly pulled his hand back and said, "We need a commander for this operation. I mean, a commander whose authority is above that of He Bangxiong and He Bupa. You need to consider the selection of this commander as soon as possible." In fact, even Chen Chen himself did not expect that the situation in Pubei would develop so quickly. It seemed as if a few months ago, the warlords here were still fighting each other for a trade route and a few pieces of territory. But just a few months later, everyone was organized into several teams with obvious factions and began to try to do something big that no one had ever done before. Of course, no one has done it, but that doesn't mean no one has done it before. The only difference is that last time, everyone's alliance was based on faith, but this time, it's based on interests. In fact, everyone knows which one is better, but it is impossible to conclude which one can go further. All in all, this is not something Chen Chen needs to consider. He just needs to focus on the present and the upcoming Battle of Jingdong. The general direction has been determined, but the more detailed combat plan has not yet been formed. Before that, I must make sure the Dongfeng Corps is fully prepared. The most important of these is the first batch of heavy bulletproof vests. In fact, Chen Chen didn't have to wait long for this batch of bulletproof vests, which were of great significance. Starting from Xiaoyu providing the contact person, just 1 week later, the first batch of 600 bulletproof vests and bulletproof plates arrived in Xiamangla, and then under Suyu's operation, they smoothly arrived in Mengka via the Dabong waterway. Looking at the mountains of bulletproof vests, all members of the Dongfeng Corps had only one thought in their minds. This is the end of the world. You know, although the Dongfeng Corps does not lack bulletproof vests, it has always been in a stretched state from beginning to end. 20 or so people could barely gather together a set of level 4 armor, but several of them were secondhand items that had been hit by bullets. They just had the damaged front panels replaced on the back where they were less easily targeted. And this time, they really achieved bulletproof vest freedom. Due to the large volume of freight, it was impossible for the Dongfeng Corps to keep it completely confidential. In addition, Chen Chen had no intention of keeping it a secret, so he simply let the news spread. This led to a result. When the bulletproof vests arrived, almost all armed gangs in Mengka City received the news. Everyone was looking forward to it, waiting for the Dongfeng Corps to continue releasing sales news. They wanted to rush to the villa with the money to get the goods, but due to the Dongfeng Corps' amazing power in Mengka, no one dared to do so. Therefore, the only people who saw the goods at the same time as Chen Chen were Jackal, Peng Shuqing, and Ibupa. Looking at the boxes of bulletproof vests unloaded from the truck and the slightly earthy paint on the bulletproof vests, Jackal couldn't help but pout and said, "It doesn't look real. How much do you think each one costs?" $10,000. Chen Chen opened his mouth and answered, "I'm talking about the purchase price. The purchase price. Can I tell you the purchase price? This is our trade secret. Come on, Rek, you can sell it for $10,000 and everyone already knows it's not worth much. Come here, tell me in secret. What's the purchase price?" Looking at the expectant expression on the Jackal's face, Chen Chen finally spoke. "After all, the price of this thing can't be a secret. After a while, Jihua will put the product online on Alibaba. BOQ quoted $2,460, and we got $1,900. $1,900? So cheap." The Jackal opened his mouth in surprise, but then he said, "Well, it's a lot cheaper than the standard level 4 body armor we use now, but that's about it. Based on the cost plus rate, the cost of this batch of bulletproof vests should be around $1,500? Well, it's much lower than the cost of current bulletproof vests." "Wrong." Chen Chen interrupted the jackal and explained, you know, the Norse foreign trade exports, especially when it comes to the export of special equipment like this, have a characteristic. That is, only the unit should be changed, not the number. It is very likely that the cost of this batch of bulletproof vests is only 2,460 renminbi. Are you kidding me? Of course Chen Chen was not joking, because he knew that the cost of this thing couldn't be that high. Now, because of the bonus of the market supply exceeding demand, Jihua can confidently and boldly ask for a high price. But after a while, when the technology starts to spread, the price of this thing will begin to drop drastically. I'm not kidding, with bulletproof plates, that's the price. In fact, Chen Chen has not yet said the most exaggerated situation. In a few years, the price of the 4th level bulletproof insert that can protect against 85 sniper and SVD will drop below 100 yuan. Sinking ship, you are too scary. You have destroyed the entire armor market. The battlefield ecology will be completely changed by you. No wonder you keep insisting on increasing firepower. It turns out you've predicted future trends. The era of full protection for light infantry is coming. Wait, let me ask you one more question. How many plates does a full set of armor cost? $1,900. 5 yuan, including 2 side guards and a crotch guard. Later, special shapes of leg guards and neck guards can be customized. Yes, the price does not increase if the quantity is increased. Stop talking, find a model. I want to see if this thing is useful, the jackal said viciously. So, Chen Chen arranged for someone to get a model out of the clothing store, put on the latest bulletproof vest, and plug in plates for it. And then various weapons began to fire in turn. 81 bars, it is impossible to penetrate. Even if multiple shots hit the same position, it is impossible to penetrate. M240, the first shot failed to penetrate, the second shot penetrated but did not cause effective damage, and the third shot completely lost its protection. Scar, the penetration of 7.62 NATO has increased to a higher level, but the first hit is still unable to do anything to this rustic-looking bulletproof vest. Seeing this result, everyone's eyes lit up. The jackal touched the bulletproof plate that was covered with bruises, and muttered, "It's over, the ship is sunk, our Armor Express has not even started selling, and it's completely unsaleable." After the test was over, the jackal, who came to watch the fun, left on his own accord, while other key figures spontaneously gathered in Chen Chen's villa. For people, Bao Xiaomei, He Bupa, Peng Xuqing, and of course Chen Chen. Among them, Peng Xuqing had purely commercial intentions. He talked with Chen Chen about the possibility of subsequent supply and procurement priorities. After confirming that Chen Chen could still get the goods later and there would be a chance to supply them to others, he said goodbye with satisfaction and left. As for the price, he was too lazy to ask. As long as there is stock, there will be people who will buy it. What does it matter whether it is expensive or not? For a businessman like him, he is more sensitive to the characteristic of scarcity of goods than anyone else. After Peng Xuqing left, the 3 forces that represented the real ability to participate in the future events finally met officially for the first time. In order to avoid embarrassing Chen Chen, Bao Xiaomei acted as the host of the conversation and explained the situation directly to the 7th Brigade. Of course, she did not reveal all the previous information, nor did she mention any topics related to the Shadow Corps or Wenbang. She only revealed the opportunity before He Bupa from the perspective of the conflict between North and South Shan State and the position of the 7th Brigade in it. Through this detail, Chen Chen also felt the different treatment from Bao Xiaomei or Hua State. Of course, this kind of differential treatment is actually very normal. After all, even without considering a certain long-eared creature, a relatively neutral force like the Dongfeng Corps is more controllable and more trustworthy than the 7th Brigade and Northern Shan State, which already have a large base. After listening to Bao Xiaomei's lobbying, He Bupa did begin to waver. The development of the 7th Brigade has reached a bottleneck because the geographical location here is too special. The water and land transportation lines are completely controlled by others. Even though the surrounding mineral resources are rich, if the transportation lines cannot be controlled, the resources here will ultimately not be able to be realized. He urgently needed to break this closed situation, and taking Jingdong was undoubtedly the best choice. But the question is, how can he guarantee that he will not be swallowed up by Hua State from north to south after his strength is greatly reduced after cooperating with Hua State to take Jingdong? No one wants to be a vassal of others, and becoming a king is the most mainstream rule here. He Bupa asked his questions, and Bao Xiaomei answered them. She said, "We need you to exist, and we need you to exist as not Hua. We can have common interests and common directions, but we cannot be one and the same. Do you understand what I mean? It's not any one person here who guarantees your safety, but..." Bao Xiaomei looked in the direction of Chen Chen, and Chen Chen cursed inwardly, but he couldn't possibly sabotage her at this time, so he had no choice but to bite the bullet and say, "I think Miss Bao's proposal is credible. After all, we all know what we should do and where the boundaries are. We can move a little bit towards a more comfortable environment, but not too much." Understood. He Bupa nodded calmly, with a gentle smile on his face whose depth was hard to tell. After a pause, he asked, "Why don't we cooperate directly with the 505th Brigade? Hit the mark." Therefore, anyone who can become a hegemon in Pubei is definitely not an easy person to deal with. This was the only thing Bao Xiaomei concealed, but it was revealed by He Bupa. Fortunately, Bao Xiaomei had already thought of a strategy to deal with it, so she explained, "Zhao Jiaoyang is too far away from us geographically, and he controls the power of Dakali. Possessing a treasure is a crime, which makes him the enemy of all of us, isn't it?" "Really?" He Bupa nodded in conviction, and at this moment, Chen Chen also felt the true charm of the 9 truths and 1 lie in the negotiation strategy. The core of it is not to hide the one falsehood, but that even if others know that there is a falsehood under the premise of the 9 truths, they can pretend not to know and ignore it. Therefore, The three parties reached a new round of consensus on this. Following the previous push for Ho Bang-sung to provoke internal disputes in southern Shan State, cooperation within the Northern Shanhua Alliance has deepened again. But this time, the 7th Brigade will also go down in person. Ibupa looked at Chen Chen with some emotion, and then said, Mr. Chen Chen is really a young hero. When I was the same age as you, I was still a soldier under the Chen family. On the other hand, Mr. Shipwreck can already stand on equal footing with so many big shots. Besides, Mr. Sinking Ship also contributed a lot to this operation, right? Those bulletproof vests alone cost a lot of money. Mr. Sunken Ship shouldn't spend this money in vain. Hearing his words, Chen Chen couldn't help but laugh. Good fellow, if you want something you just want it, but you have to come up with such a fancy excuse. I haven't even opened my mouth to say anything yet, and you've already assumed that the thing is for you? However, it is true that the first battle of the Jingdong attack must take place between the 7th Brigade and the Munku camp. In this case, it is only natural to strengthen the 7th Brigade first and preserve their strength as much as possible. So Chen Chen replied, let me be frank. This batch of bulletproof vests is not cheap. I spent a lot of money to transport them from the north. I have to find a way to recover this part of the cost. I originally planned to offer $15,000 per piece, but we are all family here, so there is no need for us to fight among ourselves. I can get a total of 1,000 sets, all for a flat price of $8,000 per set. I can give 300 sets to the 7th Brigade. Captain He, you can fully arm your elite private army battalion. Their combat effectiveness will be increased by at least multiple times. It's a bit expensive. Ibupa frowned in a hesitant manner and bargained. Mr. Rek, I know this price is very fair. And with a major war imminent, we are in urgent need of a large amount of protective equipment. But for $8,000 per set, I had to pay $2.4 million on the spot, which is not a small amount. Sir He, $2.4 million is not enough to cover the cost of clearing my joints. Chen Chen reminded calmly, but in fact, he had no connection fee at all. The information cost of this business was just the long-distance call fee to Xiaoyu. However, the more he said this, the more credible it seemed to Ibupa. After a moment's silence, he said, then let's go with this price. But in the future, when the costs are recovered, will the price also have to be lowered? Is there any need to say that? Chen Chen spread his hands calmly and replied, there will be more and more of these things in the future, and they will become cheaper and cheaper. I guarantee that everyone in the 7th Brigade can afford a bulletproof vest. That's fine. Ibupa joyfully shook hands with Chen Chen, and the two smiled at each other, saying everything. The handover of equipment went very quickly. That afternoon, Ibupa arranged for his quartermaster to go to the Dongfeng Corps to transport all the bulletproof vests away. At the same time, the payment was directly transferred to the account via bank transfer. Looking at the bright figure of 2,400,000, Chen Chen couldn't help but sigh at how easy it was to do arms business. This wasn't even arms, but he could make a 300% net profit just by selling bulletproof vests. With this batch of goods, he recovered all the costs he invested and earned hundreds of thousands of dollars more. The total time he spent was just over a week. Damn, if things continue to develop like this, what kind of war can he fight? No wonder the Americans were so unwilling to join World War II. Who would give up such a business? Of course, this is just a joke. The reason why the United States can become the world's largest arms dealer, and even the center of the world economy, is not just because of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Motors, and the like, but more because of the harmless fat man and little boy. Security is won through fighting, and so is the market. Now, after completing the first business, the Dongfeng Corps will begin to fight for its own interests through practical actions. In the combat command room, Chen Chen briefed the core group of the Dongfeng Corps, explaining the current situation and the next plan. We have reached a consensus with Northern Shan State and Hua State. In the next 2 weeks, the 7th Brigade will take the lead in exerting pressure on the Burmese army in the Munku camp, forcing the Burmese army to withdraw from Munku and retreat to Kingtung or Tongyai. There is no doubt that this is not a problem that can be resolved through peaceful negotiations. Conflict is bound to break out between the two sides. However, due to the constraints of the previous reorganization plan, the two sides will conduct communication in a relatively restrained manner. That is, the conflict will be limited to the Myanmar army in Munku camp and the 7th Brigade. Therefore, how to quickly disband the Munku camp and how to solve the problem without affecting the overall interests of Myanmar has become our core goal. To achieve this goal, we must develop a detailed operational plan. In the essence of this combat, plan is speed. We must be so quick that other Burmese troops have no time to react, and we must make the problem incomplete. According to the map, the nearest garrison of the northeastern military region to Munku is located in Jinglong, and the straight-line distance from Jinglong to Munku is about 160 kilometers. According to the speed of the Burmese army's deployment, their main force can arrive within 2 days, which means that our combat window is only 2 days. Then, the operational scenario is as follows. We will cooperate with the 7th Brigade to quickly complete the decapitation operation against corrupt Burmese army officers in the Munku camp. The purpose of the operation is to arrest drug dealers. After the decapitation is completed, the 7th Brigade will initiate a comprehensive takeover of the Munku camp, defeat the Burmese army's forces that have penetrated deep into northern Shan State in the shortest possible time, pull out the nails, and establish a defense line in the Mingxiu area to block the Burmese army's reinforcements. The 7th Brigade then split its troops into 2 groups. One group continued to defend Mingxiu, and the other group moved south to the vicinity of Jingdong to take over the defense and siege positions of the 756th Brigade. The 756th Brigade, which will be replaced, will bypass Kingtung from the west, attack Palau to the south, and block the Kingtung-Tachalike transportation line. So far, the first phase of the combat objectives have been completed. Subsequent missions targeting Jingdong and Dakali will be updated in real time according to changes in the battle situation. Everyone, is this clear? Clear. After listening to Chen Chen's briefing, all the core team members in the command room felt excited for no reason. At this moment, all of them had the same idea, which was shit. The big one is really coming. Yes, the Dongfeng Corps had fought wars before, but that so-called war was actually against the incompetent civilian armed forces. Even among the militias, they are ranked at the bottom and are relatively weak. But now, the Dongfeng Corps is really going to participate in the serious core combat. First attack Mingku, then Jingdong, and finally take Dakali into your possession. Conquering cities and making achievements on the battlefield. This is the real battle. When thinking of that magnificent future, even Sure Dekai couldn't help but have a twinkle in his eyes. He still remembered that on the night when he killed Chen Chen and the designated he family member, Chen Chen once said meaningfully that no one would be a mercenary for a lifetime. So now, is the Dongfeng Corps finally going to take the first step? He wanted to ask, but he knew he couldn't. However, he didn't ask, but the more stubbornly Bang asked without hesitation. Brother Chen, after we conquer Jingdong, will Mengka belong to us? What I mean is that the 7th Brigade must be transferred to Jingdong and Mengka. What are you thinking about? Chen Chen interrupted him mercilessly, and then said, remember, we are just a mercenary group. When we grow bigger, we may become a large-scale conglomerate. But we are not warlords and we cannot be warlords, understand? I see. As soon as these words were spoken, Go immediately responded with a smug look on his face. In his opinion, none of the people in the core group could move the leader's heart. What a joke. What is the background of the head of the group? How can he establish his own faction? Or to put it another way, how can he admit that he has established his own faction? Opening a company, doing business, taking every step carefully, everything is reasonable and legal. No one can find fault with it. This is the correct path of development. Relying on the big tree behind, creating a giant company across Pubei. Isn't it much better than being a shitty warlord? So he looked at Chen Chen expectantly and said, we are businessmen, right? Head of the group? Yes, we are businessmen. Chen Chen secretly thought that Go had finally saved him some worries, but he didn't expect that his next sentence would be exactly the same as before. He said, Captain, we are selling bulletproof vests now. When can we sell tanks? Shut up. Chen Chen shook his head helplessly and was about to continue speaking, but at this moment, Sure Dakai spoke. And finally, he was the first to ask a constructive question. How will our decapitation operation against the Mengku camp take place? The terrain of Mengku camp is very steep and heavily guarded. It is not easy to conduct infiltration operations. I think maybe we can delay it a little bit and consider it after the helicopter arrives? Hearing his words, Chen Chen shook his head. Your thinking is still too narrow. A decapitation operation doesn't mean we have to rush in front of the enemy with a knife. Mengka is less than 15 kilometers away from Mengku camp. Our AH-2s, just for show. The shells that were hidden earlier can be used as well. Well, they were taken out smoothly. The plan was drawn up quickly, but the action could not be rushed. Large-scale joint operations are not like the guerrilla warfare that the Dongfeng Corps had fought before. The issue of command authority alone is enough for the three parties involved in the operation to discuss for several days. Of course, this is also a necessary step. After all, the two forces have never had any experience of cooperation before. If the problem is not solved now, it will be very fatal if there is poor information transmission and command failure on the battlefield. Therefore, Chen Chen did not urge them, nor did he give them any hints, but what was quite dramatic was that the three parties argued back and forth and finally came to a conclusion that made Chen Chen laugh and cry, which was, since the two main combat forces each had their own relatively separate combat missions, there were not many opportunities for coordination and linkage, so there was no need to establish a unified command. The command authority still belongs to the frontline troops, but in order to facilitate subsequent dispatch and liaison, a role similar to combat staff should be established between the three parties to be responsible for communication and liaison. There is no doubt that everyone wants to assign this task to Chen Chen, because he is the only one among the forces who is not bound by territory or vested interests. It's like in the hospital, your family may want you to die, not to mention your enemies, but the doctor is the one who wants you to live under any circumstances. The situation of the current alliance of the three parties is the same. Hua State can withdraw at any time, the 7th Brigade may defect, and the 756th Brigade may take action to cut off the support, but only the Dongfeng Corps will regard the capture of Jingdong as a task that must be completed. Chen Chen has no way to defend or refute this judgment, but he will definitely not be stupid enough to really take it on. Are you kidding me? I'm just a mercenary. I took advantage of your big move to get involved, take on some missions, sell some arms to make some money, and do my own things. Killing the people who should be killed is already the limit. You still want to drag me into it? Stop talking about this. I can't take the blame for this. Moreover, he also knew that this so-called operation staff did not mean that he had become the chief officer of everyone, nor did it mean how much decision-making power he had in this super large-scale operation. At most, he could gain some initiative beyond his expectations. Not worth it, very not worth it. Instead of worrying about this, it is better to make money quickly. Sell as many bulletproof vests as possible. After the second batch of bulletproof vests arrived in Mengka, Chen Chen immediately arranged for assault boats and cargo ships to deliver them to the 756th Brigade via the Mekong River, and collected a huge amount of money from the 756th Brigade. Afterwards, he immediately collected a large amount of cash and once again issued a purchase order to the north through Suyu. This time, he asked for a total of 2,000 bulletproof vests, intending to stockpile them for a while before deciding how to distribute and sell them. Of course, now that the trade route has been opened and the connection has been established, he will definitely not waste the relationship with Jihua 3523. In these years, the North has made some progress in optical observation equipment, especially in 2008, when all the core technologies of thermal imaging were broken through. The Western export ban on equipment with more than 300,000 pixels was directly broken, and civilian thermal imagers began to flourish. The most representative of these is Guide Infrared, which even developed a 2-megapixel infrared focal plane array detector in 2009, bringing advanced equipment such as thermal imaging into the mainstream. Although the development of the civilian market is not as fast as that of the military market, the prices of thermal imagers and thermal imaging telescopes are generally still very high. But high prices do not mean that they are unavailable. Because, after the ban was lifted, major international manufacturers have begun dumping portable thermal imagers to the north. He put forward a purchasing demand in the name of forest fire monitoring equipment procurement, and the Jihua factory came forward to collect a batch of portable thermal imagers available on the market. There were about 100 in total, and the total price was no more than 1.1 million US dollars. We have everything from Celestron, BGA, to FEIRSH. These things are certainly not as sophisticated, convenient, and suitable for combat as the 4-eye night vision goggles used by Chen Chen and his team, but the difference between having them and not having them is the difference between life and death. You guys are about to have a big fight. Are you sure you don't want to buy some for emergency use? In addition, Chen Chen also bought a batch of ordinary telescopes. These things are really cheap, and Jihua didn't even charge for them in the end, just gave them away as gifts. But Chen Chen sold it to the 7th Brigade and made a small profit of 200,000 US dollars. At this point, almost everything that could be sold in the short term had been sold. After making money, Chen Chen began to prepare to obtain more information he needed. The coalition forces need someone to keep an eye on the movements of the Shadow Corps because they are the only special forces in the entire Shan State region that are still capable of carrying out decapitation operations. They must be prevented from causing unnecessary trouble outside the battlefield. If possible, they must be eliminated before a large-scale battle begins. This mission is also the mission of the Dongfeng Corps. To achieve this goal, the best candidate should have been the experienced Jiang He, but Chen Chen did not choose him. The reason is simple. He does not meet the standard of credibility. Chen Chen and Bao Xiaomei had the same idea on this point, so after a brief discussion, they unanimously decided to put Jiang He under house arrest first, and Chen Chen would select other people to carry out the infiltration and reconnaissance mission. So the task finally fell on Sang Yi. It was not the first time for him to act as an intelligence officer, so he was quite familiar with the job. After watching Sang Yi leave, Chen Chen had finished everything he could do. What we need to do next is to wait quietly, waiting for the time to be ripe, waiting for the training to be completed, waiting for the logistics to be fully prepared, and waiting for the main officers of the Mengku camp to return to their camp. Late at night, the muzzle of the AH-2 quietly turned, and Chen Chen carefully checked all the parameters. This time he calculated very carefully. Just then his cell phone rang. There is no doubt that the only person who could call him at this time was Xiaoyu. What are you doing? Xiaoyu's tone made Chen Chen stunned, and he didn't even know how to answer for a moment. After thinking for a moment, he said, I'm adjusting the gun position. Don't tell me it's that H2-inch that is. Chen Chen answered with a guilty conscience. He felt like a rebellious child, doing something that his parents did not explicitly prohibit but obviously did not approve of, and he was caught. Fortunately, Xiaoyu seemed to have been prepared for his answer and his current situation. After hearing this answer, he did not show too much surprise, but just said with a little earnest words, Sunken, remember, this matter is not your business. I'm calling you to remind you of this. We've said before that business matters are business matters, and business matters are business matters. I hope you can keep the distinction. Don't worry, I know the difference very well. Chen Chen sighed and continued, I am not the leader of this incident. I just hope to use this incident to solve some of our own problems. For example, taking out the Shadow troops. That in order to defeat the Shadow army, you want to turn the entire Shan State upside down. It was the Bao family who turned it over, not me. You should call Bao Xiaomei or Bao Youxiang. Chen Chen's answer almost choked Xiaoyu. After a few seconds, she continued, someone has already talked to her. I can't control her. I am only responsible for you. My job is only responsible for you. Anyway, you should keep a good balance. Don't do anything you shouldn't do ever. Otherwise, there's no going back. Hearing this, Chen Chen nodded subconsciously. After a moment of silence, he said straightforwardly, you can put your trust in me. I never push for anything. I just did what a mercenary would do. I just sell equipment, take on missions, and kill the biggest threat to me. Hua State, Northern Shan State, and King Tung are just background figures. What they do has nothing to do with me. To be honest, I just want to kill the Shadow army. But that's good. Xiaoyu's tone on the other end of the phone instantly relaxed, and then she said, if that's the case, then we can continue with some of the things we talked about before. Your helicopter is ready. There are 2 plans. Which one do you choose? Chen Chen instantly became interested. Tell me about it? Xiaoyu coughed and said, Option 1. I'll give you the Dolphin as you requested, but you have to wait 6 months. Option 2. I'll give you 8 meters. It will arrive in 2 weeks at most. Well, which one do you choose? You didn't intend to let me choose at all? No, this is too much of an insult. The Mi-8 is such an antique from such an ancient era, and you still want to use it to follow me. It's the Mi-171SH, an improved version of the Mi-8. Xiaoyu interrupted Chen Chen, who, after being stunned for a moment, immediately said, Plan 2. Plan 2. Where do we pick up the goods? Mi-171SH. This helicopter has both rare and common attributes. Among them, the rarity is that, until 2020, a certain major country in the north was still continuously purchasing this thing because it has a large carrying capacity, strong functionality, huge firepower potential, and is very suitable for use as a multi-purpose helicopter. As a helicopter, its powerful performance is quite rare. But there is actually no dispute about it being common. because the prototype of this thing was born in the 1950s, and it itself was successfully developed around 1993 and put into mass production in 2000. In a sense, this thing is an upgraded version of the Air AK. Its production volume is so large, and its application is so wide that few other types of helicopters in the world can match it. This helicopter can be seen everywhere in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Even Wa State actually has two Mi-171SH. Moreover, they obtained it quite early. It was photographed in 2008, and it carried out several air assault missions against the Myanmar army in 2013. So, in general, the fact that CIU can provide this type of helicopter is actually much more reliable than the Dolphin or the Z9. But the question is where to pick up the goods? I don't want to make this thing myself, do I? Give me the coordinates and let me grab it myself? Chen Chen suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. But fortunately, CIU's answer made him feel relieved. You don't have to worry about receiving the goods. I definitely won't let you drive by yourself. Besides, if I ask you to open it, can you open it clearly? I really don't understand. In fact, it's not just that it's difficult to open, it's simply impossible to open. A Mi-171SH can be equipped with up to 6 crew members, including the flight captain, co-pilot, flight mechanic, release mechanic, electronic specialist, and attendant. The electronic specialist and the serviceman can be combined, and the two mechanics can barely be used interchangeably. But even so, at least 4 crew members are needed to make the plane fly. Under such circumstances, it is basically impossible for the Dongfeng Corps to independently operate the Mi-171SH in the short term. His previous consideration was to temporarily rely on the strength of Poly and Wa State to maintain it, and then slowly recruit and train them in the later stage, and finally achieve complete independence. So when CIU asked him about it, he did not hide his difficulties and said frankly, moreover, the problem we are facing now is not whether or not to open the school or how to open it, but the issue of cultivating a talented team. After all, helicopters are different from vehicles on the ground. We don't have the opportunity to make mistakes. One mistake could lead to the annihilation of the entire army. On the other hand, you said it yourself. This is a Mi-171SH. I don't know what weapons it will be equipped with, but Tianyin, C5 and the like should be standard, right? Its firepower is strong enough to knock down a small warlord. I can't safely hand this thing over to an outsider, so if there is no flight crew, I'd rather you don't give it to me first. A man is innocent, but he is guilty of possessing a treasure. After hearing his words, CIU seemed quite satisfied. She let out a long and said approvingly, "You've thought it through very clearly. Well, do you have any good ideas?" This is an obvious test, but Chen Chen will not be unable to withstand such a test. After a slight hesitation, he said, "It depends on the specific source of the helicopter and the delivery method. First, let's rule out the northern goods, because they are not yet ready for elimination, and the current models are unlikely to be given to us. Secondly, let's rule out the possibility of a foreign product. After all, if it was a foreign product, you wouldn't have to call me. Just give me a contact person and I can contact them myself. Generally speaking, it's most likely smuggled goods from a Southeast Asian country, from Laos. If it's really Laos, then the crew members are actually relatively easy to deal with. We could just pack them up and bring them over with the equipment. I remember they have this service, right?" The so-called equipment rental is actually an ironic term used by Chen Chen. It refers to the fact that the armies of countries in the Golden Triangle, including Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos, are generally deeply entangled with private armed forces and warlord armed forces, and can even spend money to purchase some military equipment or even the right to use the army. This is similar to what the Americans did in Iraq. If this is really the route, Chen Chen can completely arrange for the separation of people and goods. The helicopter can be transported to Mungka according to the normal scrapping and export procedures, and the personnel can be rented under various pretexts such as inspection or exchange. However, this method of operation does not completely solve the problem of credibility. It can only be said that both parties have leverage over each other, which is slightly more reliable than Chen Chen going to find someone himself. Therefore, Chen Chen didn't want Xiaoyu and the others to go through this process, but if there was really no other way, he could just make do with it. After hearing his guess, Xiaoyu on the other side denied it without hesitation. How could it be so complicated? I've said it before, business is business, and we will definitely complete the agreement in a purely commercial manner. Since you are so familiar with the Mi-171SH's weapon configuration, you should also know who has this helicopter in Pubei, right? Kachin Hua. Karen seemed to have it, I'm not sure. Chen Chen replied. Yes, Kachin and Hua have them, but Karen doesn't. They only have Mi-8. Then do you know where the Mi-171 helicopters and pilots in Hua State come from? Then don't keep me in suspense. I really don't know. Just tell me directly. Chen Chen sighed helplessly. He vaguely felt that Xiaoyu really overestimated him. Are you kidding me? If I knew where the helicopters and pilots in Hua State came from, I wouldn't have to fawn over you all the time. I would have bought them myself. In fact, the source of the helicopters in Hua State is highly confidential. Many people think that they came directly from the north, but in fact they are not. Not only the helicopter is not, but also the series of weapons, equipment, and electronic equipment on it are not. Chen Chen knew that they had taken a complicated and tortuous import route, bypassing multiple audits with the help of Laos, but he really didn't know how they got there. However, Xiaoyu's next answer gave him a simple answer. The equipment was purchased from Laos. Laos has its own export demands, there is no doubt about that. But they just deliver, and after that, they don't care anymore. So, the pilot issue is another issue. However, there are still many retired civil aviation pilots. After hanging up the phone with Xiaoyu, there was finally a clear plan for the delivery of the helicopter. Just as Chen Chen expected, the cargo had been prepared long ago and was currently parked at an unknown civilian airport in Laos. The fuel was full, and the C-5 rockets were already hung. Although there was no TY-90, there were 3 more 12.7mm heavy machine guns on the nose, side door, and tail door. Moreover, this was not the final armed state. Because there are 2 empty hanging points on its short wings, if necessary, it can directly purchase upgrade kits from the Russians and mount heavy machine guns. This thing sounds full of martial virtues just by listening to it. It is simply a substitute for Pu Beiping's aerial gunboat. Chen Chen wanted to fly the plane back immediately, but the pilot had not arrived yet, and the procedures had not been arranged yet, so Chen Chen had no choice but to be patient and wait a few more days. But what can we do by waiting? The coalition's combat plan has not yet been launched. Even though the AH-2's gun has been aimed at the Mungkum military camp before receiving the order, let alone firing, Chen Chen cannot even send out the forward observation post. In addition, the business matters have been basically completed, and now the state of the Dongfeng Corps is particularly strange. Just like candidates before the college entrance examination. You clearly know that the big exam is just around the corner. You clearly know that you may face a major test. And you clearly know that there will be great gains after the major test. This should have been the most stressful time, but the school leaders arranged a 3-day vacation at this time. And they also took away all your books, meaning that you can relax before the big exam. Who can stand this? So Chen Chen had to vent his slightly suppressed emotions on the Dongfeng Corps. Its specific manifestation is that the training starts directly with increasing intensity. Of course, it's not the Devil's Week or the Devil's Month. Instead, it was extremely dull and boring helicopter boarding, alighting, and rappelling training. Ga was responsible for bringing back a container, and then asked someone to cut 2 small doors on the container and raise the container to a height of more than 1 meter. Then he practiced going up and down this side, and it took him half a day to practice. In addition, they also practiced operating machine guns to provide cover in a confined space. If the conditions are not enough, manpower will be used to make up for it. A crane is found to lift the container in the air. The machine gunner moves a small stool and sits next to the small door, while the people below tie a rope and pull the container back and forth. Although it looks a bit ridiculous, it really works. It only took 1 day for several machine gunners to completely adapt to the irregular shaking scene. Although their shooting was not very accurate, at least they would not vomit due to the shaking. In addition, now that the machine gunner has adapted, everyone else must also adapt. It is no exaggeration to say that it took Chen Chen less than 2 days to complete the demystification of all members of the Dongfeng Corps. Before this, most of them looked at helicopters with awe, admiration, and fear, but 2 days later, they were probably left with only boredom and nausea. I don't know if when the helicopter really flies over, in their eyes it will just be a large container with different paint jobs. In any case, the results of this training are still quite gratifying. Of course, because it is not too complicated, Chen Chen did not spend too much time to accumulate proficiency. Instead, he simply practiced it and let it go once he could meet the basic requirements. The really difficult part is the rappelling training that follows. This thing is an advanced skill among advanced skills. Not to mention ordinary mercenaries, even the regular armies of various countries have trouble using it. There is no need to talk about India. They would be embarrassed to do their year-end summary if there were not a few deaths in the crashes every year. Even the air assault brigades of the United States, Russia, and a certain big country in the north have frequent accidents in this subject. Chen Chen didn't really want everyone to master the helicopter rappelling skills. In Li Bang's words, it was just for fun since they had nothing to do anyway. A rope was hung down from the roof of the villa, and then everyone took turns to rappel down. Those who were afraid to go down were kicked down. Anyway, there was a swimming pool below, so no one would die from the fall. After 3 days of training, everyone felt like they had lost all hope in life, and it even got to the point where they would reach for their waist whenever they saw a rope. It's hard to say much about this habit. 5 days have passed in a flash, and there is new news from Xiaoyu. The plane is ready, and the pilot is in place. Now we just need to wait for the right time to transport the helicopter over. It will be in place within 5 days at the latest. That's her promise. But why this time? And when exactly is the right time? Xiaoyu didn't say, and Chen Chen didn't ask. All he could do was to quickly clear out an area to serve as an airport for the helicopter. The Dongfeng Corps had to do this job themselves, so all the team members finally got a short rest. Those team members who were originally unwilling to do this kind of odd jobs also picked up shovels and rushed to the front as if they had received a blessing. It took half a day to level the site, 1 day to do simple paving, and 2 days to put up the wire mesh, arrange the circuits, install the lights, and arrange the monitoring and guard posts. A crude temporary airport was built. However, although the airport was simple, the location chosen by Chen Chen was not a joke at all. It is surrounded by trees and tall buildings for protection, with a previously installed billboard, "Drug abuse is harmful to health," in the middle. The north is protected by the main building of the villa, and the north and south are the widest parts of the Mekong River. Basically, this temporary airport has eliminated all possible raids. By adding more camouflage nets and building a hangar, its safety on the ground can be guaranteed. Everything is ready, just waiting for the helicopter. The longer Chen Chen waited, the more anxious he became. He wanted to call Xiaoyu directly to ask how the arrangements were going. But he also knew that if Xiaoyu said he would wait, then he would definitely have to wait. But fortunately, he didn't have to wait for long. On an ordinary night, Chen Chen suddenly received a call from Xiaoyu. Less than an hour later, the unique roar of a helicopter suddenly descended on Myanmar. Chen Chen personally provided ground guidance, but in fact, the helicopter pilot did not seem to need this kind of thing. He simply and somewhat roughly dropped the helicopter that Chen Chen had been dreaming about to the ground, without any unnecessary shaking. The engine was still on, and someone came down from the side door. Chen Chen couldn't wait to greet him, and happily place his hand on the wall of the plane. "That's the feeling," echoed. His face was full of ecstasy, while Xiaoyu, who was standing next to him, was simply dumbfounded. She opened her mouth subconsciously, But in the end, she didn't say anything. Forget it. What can I say to him? Let's just get along with each other. What else can we do? Please sign the contract. This is the export contract for rescue helicopters signed by the Laos Mangshin Civil Aviation Group. The total price is 3.5 million US dollars, including a series of rescue and clearance equipment, as well as cargo transportation and subsequent maintenance services. This contract is in triplicate. One copy is for you to keep, one copy is for Mangshin Civil Aviation, and one copy is for us to keep. Please sign Supplemental Agreement 1 to confirm that we, the Pandong Flight Training Center, will undertake the subsequent training and support work. We will ensure that your personnel obtain helicopter pilot licenses within the next 72 months. During this period, you can borrow the training helicopters we provide for flight training and accumulate flight hours. For the specific training plan, please see Supplementary Agreement 2. Please sign the Integrity Commitment, Anti-Money Laundering Commitment, Anti-Commercial Bribery Commitment, Non-U.S. Element Audit Approval Commitment, EHA's Commitment, SLA Commitment. Please confirm the QoS Clause, Force Majeure Clause, Breach of Contract Clause, and sign on each page. Please sign Supplementary Agreement 3 to confirm the subsequent procurement plan for spare parts, fuel, and other resources. In the Villa's combat command room, the pen in Chen Chen's hand flew up and down, and he signed documents one after another under the guidance of the professionals who followed the helicopter. The total thickness of these documents exceeded 2 centimeters. It was impossible for Chen Chen to read every page, but he had to sign his name on every page. To be honest, this was definitely not a pleasant job. He wished he could let Go do it for him, but under Xiao Yu's stern gaze, he finally shook his hands and continued to sign. It took Chen Chen 2 full hours to finally sign all the documents. At this moment, he really felt like a businessman doing international trade. How professional are these people on the opposite side? The contract and the supplementary agreement were just the tip of the iceberg. They even asked me to open a letter of credit in the name of Huamei Home Cleaning Company and use the letter of credit to complete the payment. But this was a joke. Not to mention that no bank would open a letter of credit for Pubei's company. Even if it was really opened, would you really dare to accept it? So, this was just a pretext. After Chen Chen stated that the letter of credit could not be issued, the other party once again took out a long-prepared supplementary document for the repayment and asked Chen Chen to sign and accept the payment in the form of DP. Chen Chen readily followed suit, and after this step, all chains of evidence were cut off and all risks were transferred to the Dongfeng Corps. The money was transferred immediately, and the so-called Mangshin Civil Aviation in Laos received the transfer quickly. After that, the ownership of the helicopter, no, the right to use it, finally belonged to the Dongfeng Corps. The two sides shook hands in a friendly manner, and then the irrelevant personnel left immediately. Chen Chen arranged a vehicle to take them to Xiamengla, and the one who stayed was the person Chen really needed. 6 in total, not including the small fish. In addition to the flight crew, there is also a ground crew. This configuration was even more luxurious than Chen had expected. He was extremely satisfied with it, and the look he showed towards Xiao Yu was a little more intimate. Xiao Yu felt a little uneasy when he looked at her, and finally she coughed, breaking the slightly awkward atmosphere. She said, "We have already dealt with the contract matters, so let's get to know each other first. I will introduce them one by one. First is Chen Chen. You can also call him by his nickname Shipwreck. He is the owner of Huamei Housekeeping Cleaning Company and also the owner of Dongfeng Private Force Company. His procedures are formal and in compliance with international legal standards. He is a serious businessman." After hearing his introduction, Chen Chen immediately stood up and shook hands with everyone else in a casual manner, and everyone else also stood up with a respectful attitude. After a round of handshakes, everyone had just sat down when Xiao Yu began to introduce other people, from the pilot to the co-pilot, from the mechanic to the ground staff. Round after round, several people stood and sat and stood, and the scene was quite funny. However, this way of introduction did deepen everyone's memory. At least after this session, Chen Chen was able to call out everyone's name and had a general understanding of their living habits. The driver was called Chung Lei, a burly Laotian man, but his favorite food was pancakes wrapped with green onions. The passenger seat is called Zhang Qian, who looks a bit like a gigolo, but can eat very spicy food. Flight mechanics and dispatch mechanics love pasta, while ground staff and electronics personnel prefer sweet food. In general, everyone's habits are quite different, but fortunately, none of them are pretentious and none of them have been spoiled. The first meeting ended smoothly. Even though the rooms in the villa were already limited, Chen Chen still cleared out enough single rooms for them to live in. There's no way around it. These people are treasures, and it's only natural that they deserve higher pay. After settling the crew members, Chen Chen and Xiao Yu returned to the combat command room. This time, what they wanted to talk about was real business. "I thought you wouldn't come. Logically speaking, at this time, your safety cannot be guaranteed if you come to Macau alone." Chen Chen spoke first, while Xiao Yu shook her head and replied, "When I was in Thailand, my safety was even less guaranteed. This is my job. Don't think too much. I'm not here just for your sake. In fact, I've already returned to work. Hubei is about to undergo a major change. Whether you are here or not, I should be here. Of course, if it weren't for you, this change wouldn't have happened." "What the hell?" Chen Chen interrupted Xiao Yu's words as if he was furious, and then explained impatiently, "This has nothing to do with me. It was clearly the Bao family who did it. Please don't put the blame on me." Hearing his words, Xiao Yu smiled slyly and asked back, "Do you know how we feel now? These are two completely different concepts. Forget it, let's not talk about this." Chen Chen sighed and continued, "I just want to ask, what are the rules for using this unit? I mean, is there a clear deadline?" Xiao Yu shook his head and replied, "No line. As I said, this is a transaction between you and 2 companies in Laos. I'm just a matchmaker. It is no different from the bulletproof vest you bought before. So, we will not interfere in any way with the use of this helicopter. As you know, Wa State also has Mi-171, but they are free to use it as well. Xiaoyu bit the word freedom firmly in her mouth, and Chen Chen understood what she meant. The so-called freedom means that I will not stop you from doing anything, but I will definitely settle the score later. So, don't go too far, and don't do things that everyone knows you shouldn't do. There was actually nothing difficult to accept about this, so Chen Chen nodded in understanding. Then he followed up on this topic and raised a new question. So these crew members are indeed employees of Pandong Company? Xiaoyu hummed and replied in a relaxed tone. Indeed. They don't have any of the background you think they should have. They really just use their skills to make a living. How is it? Does it look like you? Similar, so similar. Chen Chen took a deep breath and didn't ask any more questions. In fact, these 2 questions are enough to solve all his problems and eliminate all his concerns. In this case, asking further questions or digging deeper into the matter would be extremely impolite to everyone. On the contrary, learning to shut up at the right time is the real way to maintain the best rhythm of cooperation. So, the topic of their conversation naturally changed. They no longer talked about helicopters or the situation in Wa State or North and South Shan states. Instead, they walked out of the room like businessmen who were out of the matter, walked under the night sky of Munka, and talked about things like residential area construction and canal excavation. Chen Chen told her about some of his future plans, such as finding ways to expand the dock, building a helicopter airport, and if there is a chance, finding ways to purchase more helicopters to form a real helicopter fleet. Xiaoyu just listened silently, without making any suggestions, but of course without any rebuttal. At the end of the conversation, Chen Chen felt that his mouth was almost dry, so he threw the initiative of the topic back to Xiaoyu. He thought Xiaoyu would not have anything to say and was prepared to take over the conversation, but what he did not expect was that Xiaoyu's views on the future development of the Dongfeng Corps were not inferior to his own as the party involved. With just a few simple words, she completely pointed out the dilemma Chen Chen was facing. If you stay in Pubei, you are doomed to not have a legal identity, nor can you obtain more resources and equipment through normal channels. So, you should broaden your horizons and, if possible, set up an offshore company overseas and handle your main business through the offshore company in the future. The Shadow Corps' model is actually very suitable. Their roots are in the United States, which gives them more room to maneuver. It's a simple example. If they wanted a helicopter, they wouldn't need a plan as complicated as yours. To put it in an extreme way, Nakam can have an armed helicopter, so why did you only get one now? I think you should understand the reason behind this. Hearing Xiaoyu's words, Chen Chen nodded silently. After a long pause, he said, "This is one of the solutions I thought of. But there is one issue that I must consider. That is, once I move my base outside of Pubei, I was out of control in a sense. And I have to be active in Pubei. It's a paradox, you know what I mean?" "I see." Xiaoyu stopped walking. She turned her head to look at Chen Chen and said, "But there is one thing I can believe. That is, a bird with a nest will not fly far. What if I don't have it?" A trace of sadness flashed in Chen Chen's eyes. This was a problem he had never mentioned to anyone, but one he had to face. From the heart point of view, there is no doubt that he certainly has a nest. But, rationally speaking, he really couldn't think of any situation that would allow him to return home in a true sense. Many times, he would deliberately avoid this problem, convincing himself that there will always be a way out when you reach the mountain, and take one step at a time and so on. But as his business grew bigger and his connections became closer, this hope became increasingly slim. So, he simply stopped thinking about it. Of course, he didn't expect that Xiaoyu would take the initiative to bring it up today. Maybe the atmosphere was right? Maybe the delivery of the helicopter caused something to change? Chen Chen didn't want to speculate about Xiaoyu or the shadow behind her with malice. He was more willing to believe that this was just an inadvertent display of kindness. After hearing his question and seeing his expression, Xiaoyu's eyes couldn't help but flicker a few times. At this moment, she probably thought of a lot of things. But in the end, those complex, chaotic, and confusing questions were finally unified, forming an extremely clear main line. And this main line finally converged into an extremely concise answer. She said, "In fact, I think you still have to put aside the phenomenon and see the essence. You have to think about who I am and who you are. You have to understand the meaning of our existence. If you understand this, you should know as long as I and we exist, you will have a nest, right?" Chen Chen fell into complete silence. After a long while, he suddenly laughed again. He looked at Xiaoyu and asked, "Why? You're here to give me some ideological training so late at night. Are you here to act as a guest political commissar?" Xiaoyu was choked by his sudden teasing and was speechless. She subconsciously raised her hand to slap him, but finally put it down. "You better not mess with me tonight," Xiaoyu said seriously. "If you say one more word to make me angry, I will take him away tomorrow. That there's no need to be so overbearing, right?" Chen Chen smiled awkwardly and looked into Xiaoyu's eyes carefully. "Well, I was indeed angry. But it is also true that although the issues they are discussing sound emotional, in fact, they are bottom-line topics that absolutely do not tolerate any dissenting opinions. If you insist on talking nonsense at a time like this, anyone would be angry. Well, if Xiaoyu is really the political commissar, I guess he has already had a stamp of a weapon belt on his forehead." Thinking of this, Chen Chen sighed and said sincerely, "I won't talk about things that are too far away, but no matter what, I will try my best to handle this incident. There is one situation that I'm not sure you guys have grasped. Tonight, the 7th Brigade and the Southern Shan State's 756th Brigade have completed their final preparations. At the same time, according to intelligence, the main officers of the Myanmar army in the Munku camp will stay in the barracks in the next 2 days. In addition, the movements of the Shadow Corps have also been confirmed. They're still in Jingdong and have not made any unexpected responses. The combat conditions are sufficient and the opportunity is rare. That is to say, tonight is the last peaceful night in Myanmar and possibly in northern and southern Shan states. Tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow at the latest, we will assist the 7th Brigade in launching the attack. I will send you back to Xiamingla in 2 hours. This is non-negotiable. You don't have to say this is your job. I believe your superiors will support my decision. The next time we meet, it will be in Jingdong. Hearing his words, Xiaoyu nodded and said, Hua State has reported progress, and I am aware of it. I plan to leave Minka at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Someone will pick me up, but you can also take me there. After a pause, she continued, Remember, I give you things so that you can use them. Use it well, don't die. That night, Xiaoyu left Minka, and then Chen Chen took out the 3 155 grenades he had hidden before and handed them over to the artillery of the 7th Brigade who was guarding the H2. At this point, no one cared to find out where the 3 shells came from or whether they were intentionally hidden by Chen Chen, because they were destined to be fired, and in order to achieve the common goal of both parties. Bupa naturally accepted Chen Chen's explanation that he accidentally found it in the warehouse. After all, the Eastern Corps had so many spoils of war, so it was reasonable to find a few shells after rummaging through boxes and cabinets, right? He even sincerely expressed his gratitude to Chen Chen. This time, it's all thanks to Commander Chen. You know, our 7th Brigade has only 2,000 people, and we don't have many good guns. The 155mm shells are also pitifully few. One less round is one less round. We also plan to use it in Jingdong. I thought about it all night, but couldn't figure out where to get 2 more shells. Now, we have 3 more, which is basically enough. Chen Chen almost couldn't hold back when he heard his words. No matter how poor the 7th Brigade was, it still had 4D, 152mm howitzers from the Russians, and at least a basic number of shells. It was impossible that 3 shells would increase the amount to the point where Bupa would be fussy about it. This is actually a rather blunt compliment. But, no matter how awkward it was, the fact that it was mainly a compliment was enough to illustrate Bupa's attitude. Therefore, Chen Chen did not expose him, but replied with a smile. It is also a coincidence. Our logistics management capabilities are still relatively backward. We don't even know what is in the warehouse. After this matter is over, I have to discuss it with Brigade Commander He. If it is feasible, we can just borrow the warehouse of the 7th Brigade. Of course, Chen Chen's words were just politeness. There was no way he would hand over the foundation of his survival to someone else. But to Bupa, it also sounded like a sign of trust and friendship. So, the plan for the bombardment was implemented. Looking at Bao Chi, who was directing his artillery team to operate the artillery, Bupa asked with some curiosity and some worry. Commander Chen, are you planning to launch an artillery attack directly at this location? This place is nearly 15 kilometers away from the Munku camp. Can it be hit? It's difficult to hit a moving target, but it's pretty easy to hit a stationary target. Chen Chen nodded slightly and continued. We will send 2 reconnaissance teams forward, one to monitor the movements of the people in the Munku camp, and one to be used as artillery reconnaissance. The maximum range of this AH-2 is close to 40 kilometers. As long as the data is correct, it can basically hit whatever you point it at. Artillerie reconnaissance? Bupa's expression suddenly changed, his eyes filled with shock. Actually, this cannot be blamed on him. Beyond visual range artillery strikes are a science. Not to mention the unpresentable ethnic armed forces like the Northern Shan State Army. Even the regular army of Myanmar cannot really handle it. According to Chen Chen, although the Myanmar army has a large number of artillery pieces, in fact, the quality of their artillery troops is extremely low, and their artillery units basically only have covering strike capabilities. Or to put it more bluntly, most of the time, when visual observation is possible, targets within a certain distance are bombarded with fire. This sounds great, but the problem is that the actual destructive effect is extremely limited. It was not until around 2017 that the Myanmar Army's mountain troops conducted large-scale artillery training with the help of Serbia and organized several large-scale exercises, initially acquiring the ability to carry out precision strikes. If even the Burmese army is like this, one can imagine what a militia group like the 7th Brigade can do. Therefore, when Bupa heard the word artillery reconnaissance, the shock in his heart was completely indescribable. It can even be said that his shock was even greater than when he saw the Mi-171 parked in the open space. After all, although it's not easy to get a helicopter, you can still get one if you think of a way. If you're not afraid of accidents, you can also invite the pilot over. But d'artillerie reconnaissance? Isn't it obvious what this represents? If there wasn't a large-scale, systematic army behind them, who would learn artillery reconnaissance? Looking at Bupa's expression, Chen Chen's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. It's broken, and it was accidentally exposed, but so what? He scratched his head subconsciously and said, it's not really an artillery reconnaissance. It's just a close-range reconnaissance to provide a basic direction for the artillery. But can we hit the target accurately with just one cannon? The AH-2 has a strike accuracy of about 1.5 meters and a range of 15 kilometers, so the hit rate is still very high. Bupa was completely stunned. Good man, you still say you don't know martial arts? If you really let your team hit the target within a range of 15 kilometers, let alone an accuracy of 1.5 meters, you should be thankful if you can achieve an accuracy of 150 meters. After seeing Bupa's expression, Chen Chen realized that the more he explained, the more complicated it became. So, he simply skipped the topic and said directly, Chief He, let's not discuss such technical issues. We should each do our own thing. I will be responsible for the beheading, and you will be responsible for dispatching the troops. The time difference must be managed well. If you haven't completed the deployment and encirclement after we finish the beheading, then the problem will be very serious. Hearing Chen Chen's words, Bupa immediately straightened his expression and then replied, Chief Chun, you can rest assured about this. The battle plan has been synchronized with you. We will definitely not have any problems with scheduling this time. At present, we have 3 company-level teams of 100 people approaching the Myanmar Army's Minku camp, less than 2 kilometers away from the enemy. After the decapitation is completed, these 3 teams will immediately rush forward to hold back the other side, buying time for the subsequent support forces. We will ensure that the encirclement is completed within 1 hour, and the Minku camp is disarmed. At the same time, we will establish a defense line within 2 hours to block the attack of the Burmese reinforcements. But at this point, it is unlikely that a battle will occur. We will have a standoff and then resolve the issue through negotiation. As for Commander Chen, you don't need to worry about him anymore after you execute him by beheading him. Clear. Chen Chen nodded seriously. At this time, behind them, all the troops of the 7th Brigade had completed their assembly. The scene was quite spectacular. Even more spectacular than when Chen Chen led his troops to fight Nuakong. However, if you look closely, you will find some discordant parts in this team. Because not only are the vehicle models not uniform, even the personnel's clothing is not uniform. The way they identify friend or foe is to tie a red cloth on their arm. Chen Chen was very skeptical. If he really faced a high-intensity, large-scale battle, would this kind of friend or foe identification really be effective? But this is not my concern. Anyway, let's give it a try. Half an hour later, Chen Chen led the team to the designated reconnaissance position. He had to go because artillery reconnaissance required him to be present at the scene in person to be able to handle it well. However, after practicing a few more times this time, it is estimated that the players with strong learning ability, including Shi Dekai and Bai Go, should be able to follow suit. Following Lin He's footsteps, a group of 7 people continued to advance through the jungle, heading towards the Minku camp under the guidance of a very weak GPS signal. After walking for 2 hours, the team reached the designated high ground. After clearing away the obstacles that blocked the view near the high ground, the shadowy Minku camp in the distance appeared before their eyes. But of course, this is not the end. Lin He will continue to move forward with Yang Shu and Li Bang as a fire reconnaissance team. Observe the specific movements of the enemy personnel from a closer perspective, form a link with the artillery reconnaissance team, and indicate the precise position. The figures of the 3 people gradually disappeared from Chen Chen's sight, and Chen Chen immediately began to deploy the artillery reconnaissance team. In fact, the most core topographic survey of this area had been completed a long time ago, when Chen Chen escorted Jia to Mengbin. He had already marked all the available locations on the battle map, and there were 4 available locations within the artillery reconnaissance team's reconnaissance range. After determining the specific objects to be used, Chen Chen determined the final observation positions, namely the subjective and side observation positions, based on the terrain. He arranged a group of people, including Bai Go and Shorty, to go to the side observation positions, while he and Shi Dekai stayed at the subjective position. The distance was too far, the telescope used by Chen Chen and his team was not accurate enough, and laser ranging was not available. Fortunately, Chen Chen had foresight and had specially imported 2 laser rangefinders with a range of more than 5 kilometers. Together with the old 40X artillery telescope collected from the 7th Brigade, the observation equipment was basically perfect. While deploying the artillery scopes, Chen Chen gave on-site instructions to everyone via radio. When we choose an artillery reconnaissance position, we must keep in mind several principles, namely, a position that is easy to observe, easy to evacuate and conceal, easy to construct camouflage, and easy to organize defense against enemy tanks. Of course, it's hard for tanks to appear in Pubay, and the mountainous terrain is not conducive to tank mobility, but we should be prepared for any eventuality, and we should still do our best to make it perfect. Also, you now see the choices made in terms of subjectivity and side viewing. We have to choose to look sideways about 300 to 500 meters to the side of the target point and subjective connection line according to the terrain. This distance is mainly to make up for the blind spots of subjective observation. In theory, the farther the distance, the better. However, considering that the subjective observation may be destroyed by the enemy, the side observation needs to be quickly replaced, so the distance should not be too far. While listening, Shi Dekai took out a notebook to take notes. This was a small habit of the Dongfeng Corps members. After all, you never know when the shipwreck commander will come up with some battlefield trivia worth recording, so it makes sense to carry a small notebook. Watching his movements, Chen Chen shook his head helplessly, and then continued while setting up the steering wheel. The steering wheel must be accurately aligned to the north, and the magnetic declination on the map must be used for correction. We must ensure that the direction measured by the steering wheel is consistent with the map. Our current map is relatively old, but the elements are complete and accurate, and it is still usable. Rear, give the reference direction. Chen Chen gave orders to Bao Qi via the radio. After a short wait, Bao Qi read out the data, and Chen Chen immediately completed the settings on the steering wheel. Then, Chen Chen continued. Now we need to measure the subjective and side view straight line distance, which is currently 420 meters. Based on this distance, we need to give the side view a reflective division. In this way, the triangle has been formed and the distance can be measured. Of course, we now have laser distance measurement, which is more accurate, but you still need to learn the method. As he spoke, Chen Chen quickly read the data and calculated the viewing distance based on the trigonometric formula. Afterwards, he determined the coordinates and elevation of the observation post based on the precise coordinates of the objects and used the main side intersection method and completed the report to the artillery position in the rear. So far, he has completed all the preparatory work required for the deployment of the artillery reconnaissance observation post. The next step is to conduct reconnaissance of the target in the reconnaissance area. Yes, nearly an hour has passed, but they have not really looked in the direction of the enemy position. This is artillery reconnaissance. Chen Chen concealed all his equipment and lay on the ground. waiting for intelligence feedback from the reconnaissance team approaching from the front. Lin He has led the team to a location only 800 meters away from the Mengku camp. From his perspective, the situation of the entire Mengku camp is in full view. He quickly pointed out several key buildings according to what Chen Chen had taught him before. Chen Chen conducted intersection operations with the side view in advance, and he was in charge of the calculation team. After calculating the intersection division and observation distance, he reported to the rear and marked them on the map. He had to do the calculation work by himself, and it took him nearly an hour to do the calculation and teach. But fortunately, they were going to carry out a surprise attack, and the operation window was incredibly wide, so there was no rush at all. And after all this was done, everyone began to enter a period of latent waiting. They must determine the specific targets for the final bombardment based on the intelligence sent back by Lin He, and strive to kill as many enemy officers as possible in one bombardment. Bao Qi sat next to the AH-2 gun somewhat bored, with Ibupa standing next to him. The latter's expression contained some expectation and some confusion, because in his opinion, the Dongfeng Corps' operation this time was a bit too unusual. Everyone was very relaxed, as if they were not going to have a big battle but just a simple training session. Especially this young man named Number 1, or Bao Qi. He even had the leisure to write and draw on paper repeatedly, and from time to time he uttered, "Oh," sounds of sudden enlightenment. Ibupa wanted to ask, "Are you really here to have sex?" But in the end, he didn't ask. After a long wait, Bao Qi's expression finally changed. He stood up suddenly and listened carefully to the information coming from the radio. After repeated confirmation, he finally reported to his commander, who was rushing to the front line. "The weather conditions are good, and the preset temperature and pressure errors are controllable. I am determined to use the precision method to effectively fire at the target. 2 consecutive shots, over. Clear." After receiving the feedback, Bao Qi immediately ordered all artillerymen from the 7th Brigade to start loading and continuously report various data. According to his data, even Monkey can adjust the cannon. But it still took the 7th Brigade's artillery a full minute. A minute later, Bao Qi personally pulled the fuse. Boom! A shell flew out of the chamber, followed by a second, corrected shell. Boom! The dust has settled. Bao Qi clapped his hands and stood up. Ibupa beside him asked in astonishment, "Is this the end?" "It's over." Bao Qi nodded and replied, "This is the real artillery fire." 15 kilometers away, the Burmese army's command post in Mengku had been reduced to ashes. They had no idea where the shells were coming from, nor how to avoid them. The entire camp was in chaos and everyone was busy hiding. However, after 2 short explosions, there was no other movement around them. Everything is silent. The camp was silent, the forest was silent, and the 2 huge bomb craters were even silent. The command post that was hit no longer existed, and half of the officers that had originally gathered inside were also gone. Yes, it is literally gone. It was blown into pieces and scattered in the air. The power of the 155mm howitzer is definitely beyond the imagination of ordinary people who have not experienced large-scale battlefields. According to exaggerated statements, its killing range can cover half of a football field. Within 6 meters of the core of the explosion, everything will be reduced to dust. Unless you hide behind a special shelter, no one can survive this arc of death. 2 minutes after the shelling, some people began to react and ran to the command post to check the situation. They tried to save people, but soon they found that the so-called rescue was meaningless. Needless to say, how could we save those who were still intact? Under the violent shockwave, their internal organs were probably shattered. The blood they spat out was mixed with pieces of internal organs and vomit from their stomachs. The scene was so horrifying that it seemed as if they were digesting themselves. Such a horrifying scene frightened the Burmese soldiers who had never experienced a battlefield. Their first reaction was not to defend themselves, but to run away. But where to escape to? The enemy is coming. Ibupa's arrangement was indeed quite reliable. He mobilized all his private soldiers, put on the bulletproof vests he got from Chen Chen, and placed them at the front. These private soldiers are far inferior to the Dongfeng Corps in terms of combat effectiveness and fighting will. However, with the help of bulletproof vests, they rushed into the Burmese military camp. It was really like entering a no man's land. Especially after the other side completely lost command, the private soldiers went crazy and killed like crazy. Thanks to the influence of the bulletproof vest bulletproof effect propaganda, specially organized by Ibupa in the military camp, almost all of them can be said to be not afraid of death. Wherever he goes, it's like a tiger among a pack of wolves. The Burmese army's heavy firepower points did play a certain role, but were quickly overwhelmed. After the first batch of commandos seized the firing points, the situation began to develop in a one-sided direction. Escape, only escape, or surrender. The reinforcements Hobu Pa arranged were of little use, as the battle did not last an hour at all. In fact, it lasted only 15 minutes. The entire Mengku military camp was completely taken over. The defenders either broke out at all costs under the leadership of junior officers, or dropped their weapons and gave up resistance. The armed reconnaissance team that did not retreat at the observation points saw the entire scene. Even the 3 people who were used to the Dongfeng Corps' victory over the larger force felt an unprecedented shock at this moment. Without a doubt, this was a big win. Moreover, it was an overwhelming victory. And the person who truly created this great victory did not even enter the battlefield from beginning to end. 2 hours later, Chen Chen led the team back to Mengka. At this time, the 7th Brigade had completely taken over the Mengku military camp and captured more than 400 Burmese soldiers. Using this as a bargaining chip, it reached a temporary ceasefire with the Burmese troops that had rushed to support from the Mingxiu area, and the 2 sides entered a standoff. For Ho Bupa, this was an unprecedented advantage that he had never imagined. Before this, even though the 7th Brigade had nearly 2,000 people, it was always firmly pinned down by the Mengku camp that was nailed into the area near Minka. There would be occasional clashes between the two sides, and occasionally there would be some tragic battles with more than 10 casualties. But overall, neither side could completely pull out the other. And now, this goal has been achieved so simply. It was so simple that Bupa couldn't even believe it was true. Seeing Chen Chen returning with a look of ease, he rushed forward, with both legs rolling and crawling. Then he held Chen Chen's hand and said in a trembling voice, "Commander Chen, we won. We destroyed the entire Minku camp with less than 50 casualties and almost no cost. I never knew that war could be fought like this. You are simply..." Ibupa didn't say anything else because he really didn't know how to describe it. However, in the face of his sincere admiration and praise, Chen Chen just shook his head calmly and then said, "The effect of this bombardment is very good. We are lucky, I should say." The preset weather conditions were not much different from the actual weather parameters, which greatly improved the accuracy of our artillery fire. The first round hit the top of the enemy's command post. The close-in arm reconnaissance was also very effective, and we caught them at the time when their senior officers were having a meeting. I don't know what kind of meeting they are having. Maybe they have noticed your abnormality and are discussing how to deal with it. That's fine, there's no need to discuss this anymore. Hearing what Chen Chen said, Ibupa wanted to laugh, but couldn't, because at this moment, his heart was completely filled with shock. There is no room for any other emotions anymore, and I can no longer say anything other than admiration. Therefore, he almost completely ignored Chen Chen's self-deprecating words and just continued to talk to himself. Commander Chen is in command. This one shot destroyed all the confidence of the Burmese army. I doubt they will dare to confront us again in the future. It doesn't matter where the command post is located. We can wipe them out with one shot. There has also been movement in Jingdong. We have just received news that the Burmese troops in Jingdong have begun to retreat into the city and have even abandoned many of the camps and outposts outside the city. Then it's time for Hebanxiong to take action, right? Chen Chen interrupted him and asked, "Get moving." Hebupa nodded solemnly and then said, "I have sent 2 troops to Kingtung and are currently preparing to change positions with the 756th Brigade in Dabong." Wait a moment. Chen Chen suddenly realized that something was wrong. Waiting in Dabong? Doesn't that mean that there will be a window of at least half an hour during the rotation between the 7th Brigade and the 756th Brigade? If at this time, the defenders of Jingdong launched an attack on the 756th Brigade and then fought all the way to Dabong, the defenders of Jingdong would retreat into the city. But were they really retreating? Chen Chen's heart suddenly jumped, and then he immediately said, "Let the 756th Brigade hold its position. Don't move, because if you move..." However, he didn't have time to finish his words. At this moment, Hobu Pa's intelligence adjutant ran up to him and said anxiously, "The Burmese army in Jingdong has launched a full-scale attack. They have organized heavy weapons and are attacking the 756th Brigade on the north side of Jingdong. The 756th Brigade may not be able to hold on. We must provide support as soon as possible." Ibupa stood there in shock, while Chen Chen suddenly calmed down. Sure enough, it couldn't be that smooth. Our plan is thorough, but the enemy is no fool either. But the problem is that given the capabilities of the Myanmar army in Jingdong, they cannot react that quickly. Emit. Shadow Corps. They intervened early. How dare they intervene in an operation of this scale? Chen Chen took a deep breath and looked at the helicopter parked in the distance. The 756th Brigade's defense line must be held at all costs. Otherwise, if the Burmese army goes upstream, Mengka will be in danger. He never expected that he had originally intended to use this helicopter to deal with the Shadow Legion. But now, we have to let it go on stage ahead of time. There is one more chapter today. The matter is basically settled. The outline is also sorted out. I'll make up for the missing later. Inside the Dongfeng Corps command room, Chen Chen pointed at the battle map on the whiteboard and briefed other members. The situation was extremely urgent, but no matter how urgent it was, they could not just rush in without thinking. Instead, they had to take some time to sort out and complete their own battle plan. Otherwise, blindly driving a helicopter to fight would be no different from committing suicide. Looking at all the team members who were ready to go, Chen Chen said, "At present, the main battle area between the Jingdong Burmese army and the 756th Brigade is in the Wampai area, which is where we ambushed Chen Chen and his private soldiers last time. This is the nearest intersection of the Mengyang and Mengla roads, and it can be said to be one of the main transportation routes for Jingdong materials. The 756th Brigade was originally deployed near Wangong village, with 2 regiments of troops, to build a complex, multi-layered defense line. However, due to the upcoming rotation, the 756th Brigade encountered problems in scheduling. The frontline troops relaxed their guard, and the forward reconnaissance post lost control of the intelligence on the Myanmar army in Jingdong. This detail was caught by the Burmese army, who quickly launched a round of artillery bombardment on Wangong village, causing heavy casualties to the local 756th Brigade garrison. Then, the 756th Brigade retreated to defend, and their first line of defense was almost instantly breached by the armored company of the Kingtung Burmese army. Wait, the Burmese army also has an armored company? Hearing Chen Chen's words, the helicopter pilot Chung Lei couldn't help but raise his hand to interrupt him. His eyes were full of confusion, because in his concept, although the Burmese army in Jingdong was large in scale, its equipment level was not too high. Having armored units and being able to form an armored company to launch an assault seems a bit too exaggerated, right? If that was the case, how could they possibly stop it with the limited number of troops they had? After all, compared to others, his understanding of the power of armored combined forces was much deeper. After seeing his expression, Chen Chen was stunned for a moment, and then he realized that this brother must have misunderstood. So he quickly explained, The armored company I'm talking about is not the kind of armored company you understand. Well, it should be said that this cannot be called an armored company, but a commando team temporarily formed by various armored units. Kingtong is an important town of the Myanmar army. According to the early intelligence reconnaissance results, they have a number of YW-531H armored transport vehicles, 86A wheeled armored vehicles, and ZFB-05 light wheeled armored vehicles. These armored vehicles were introduced and deployed gradually. The total number is not too large, but there are more than 10 of them in total. In addition, they also have 2 PTL-02 wheeled assault guns and 2 MBT-2000 tanks, which are equipment they have previously paraded and reported publicly. So, in summary, the number of armored clusters they were able to organize is about 15 to 20 vehicles. In the area of Pubay, especially in northern Shan State, this is already a very powerful firepower. These armored vehicles were not widely used in the early stages of the confrontation because, to be honest, their protection was very low. Without systematic equipment support, even a light infantry squad could easily destroy an expensive armored vehicle. So, before a large-scale battle was confirmed, the Myanmar army hid their armored vehicles very deep. But it's clear now that they've let loose. I don't know who's behind it, but they're certainly moving very decisively. Just from the fact that they sent a large number of armored units to attack, it can be seen that they must be determined to make progress on the northern battlefield. We must find a way to stop their offensive, or at least delay it until the 7th Brigade arrives to provide support, until both sides have completed their rotation and rebuilt their defenses. After listening to Chen Chen's explanation, Cheng Lei nodded thoughtfully. He was certainly not completely familiar with the performance of the armored units mentioned by Chen Chen, but at least from the name, he knew what they were. Therefore, after careful consideration, he suddenly raised a very critical question. So, all these armored units you mentioned have no anti-aircraft capabilities at all? Indeed not. No self-propelled anti-aircraft trucks, SK-1 or anything like that? No, Chen silently replied. In fact, this is a very natural thing. Although Kangtung is a very large city in Pubay, it is nothing compared to the whole of Bagan. Not to mention Yangon and Mandalay, which are really big cities and stable areas. Even Tongyai, Lashio, and Kyokmi are not less in size than Kangtung. It is already good enough to be allocated more than a dozen armored vehicles because of its status as the gateway to the Golden Triangle. Air defense? Defense against whose air? The ethnic armed groups do not have air forces, while Thailand and the North do have air forces. But if either of these two sides sets their sights on Jingdong, Myanmar will not have to consider how to defend itself. The best option is to surrender. After hearing Chen Chen's answer, Cheng Lei felt incredible, but on second thought, he felt it was expected. After a brief pause, he continued to ask, armored units don't have air defense capabilities, so do they have portable anti-aircraft missiles? This question was very tricky, but Chen Chen answered it effortlessly. Because he knew that in the entire Pubay area, the only person capable of obtaining missiles was Chasely. Although the Myanmar military certainly has a small number of individual missiles, it is absolutely impossible for them to be deployed on a large scale in Jingdong. So he answered, they don't have missiles like the Vanguard and Stinger, but I suspect they may have a small number of Javelin missiles to target the armored vehicles modified by the militias themselves. The Javelin can attack low-speed helicopters and pose a certain threat to us. It's useless. We just need to attack from close range and increase our speed. They can't even reach us. Cheng Lei shook his head and continued to ask, where are the anti-aircraft guns? Did they deploy anti-aircraft guns near the battlefield? No. According to the feedback from the 756th Brigade, there are a small number of anti-aircraft guns in the center of Jingdong City, but they are nearly 15 kilometers away from the current combat area and are completely out of range. Understood. Cheng Lei let out a long sigh and said, the situation is now very clear. In a word, the other side has no air defense capability at all. I think we don't need to make it so complicated. You guys stay in Munka, we'll fly over and shoot down the rockets. Then we'll come back for dinner. At the same time, one was wandering nearby. The Armored Assault Company of the Myanmar Army's Jingtong Border Defense Brigade had crossed the first line of defense organized by the 756th Brigade. Under the cover of 6 155 caliber Kh-179 heavy artillery in the rear, the 756th Brigade did not put up any effective resistance at all. I have to say, there must be a reason why cannons are called the god of war. Even though advanced weapons are constantly developing, and even though the range of missiles and rockets is getting longer and their power is getting stronger, simple and reliable artillery is still the best choice for quickly establishing local advantages. Although the fire net fired by the 6 cannons was a bit sparse, under such earth-shaking momentum, no team without professional training could withstand the overwhelming pressure it exerted. Together with the armored forces that followed up, the Border Defense Brigade's assault on the 756th Brigade's position can be described as unstoppable. The tanks were still advancing slowly. At this time, their armored unit had left the coverage of the artillery in Jingdong City. Of course, it was not really out of the artillery's range, but out of the distance where the Burmese army could operate the artillery. This is actually not good news, because after losing artillery cover, light armored units will become quite vulnerable. In case the opponent has a large number of anti-armor weapons, such as bazookas, rockets, or light howitzers, the armored company's offensive is likely to be blocked, and the marching assault speed will be forced to slow down. However, the battlefield commander who actually controlled the assault deliberately ignored this risk. This was certainly not because of his stupidity. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was due to his keenest and most accurate judgment of the battlefield. Standing at the edge of the battlefield, the last surviving member of the Shadow Corps IMT team, a man named Connor, who is also the commander of the IMT team, held up a telescope and carefully observed the situation on the battlefield. It was hard for him not to lament the poor equipment level, weak fighting will, and low technical and tactical level of this team, because he had clearly instructed them many times to maintain the formation during the assault. But after gaining the advantage, those damn Burmese soldiers, unsurprisingly, threw all his orders behind their backs. The light armored units rushed in front of the heavy armored units. The two tanks that were supposed to be used as shields fell to the back, and the light armored vehicles carrying uncontrolled rockets blocked the firing range of the entire armored company after they ran out of ammunition. He had no doubt that if there was a commander among his enemies who had a little understanding of modern armored force tactics, they would immediately launch a counterattack in the face of such a big flaw on their side, using high-speed anti-armored light infantry teams to replace this entire armored assault company at a very small cost. But how could such a thing happen? After all, their enemies were just militiamen, and their combat capability was limited to being able to organize infantrymen with guns to charge forward. In this case, it is actually unnecessary to consider the risks too much. There is only one thing to do, and that is hurry up. Break through all the enemy's defense lines as quickly as possible. Wipe out all their troops deployed on the north side. Take over the Mingyang Highway, and then go north along this main traffic artery to capture the important town in northern Shan State called Monka. Only in this way can he help the Burmese army truly regain the initiative and make up for the gap caused by their defeat in the Mengku camp. Only in this way can he have the opportunity to keep Jingdong in the hands of the Myanmar army and maintain this important stronghold for power expansion. This was a forced choice and the fundamental reason why he had to intervene in this dispute. Damn, Banglong was originally his ideal base. But the mercenary group called Dongfeng is really too strong. 5 versus 6. Our side was clearly in the upper hand, but they were able to hold out until reinforcements arrived and until they could use heavy machine guns to complete the harvest. Such quality cannot be found anywhere else in Pubei. But so what? It's all about to end. When the Burmese army captures Mengka, the Dongfeng Corps, which has lost all its foundation, will quickly wither like a tree without nutrients even if it can escape, and the Shadow Corps can step on their corpses and grow stronger step by step. Thinking of this, Connor breathed a sigh of relief. He picked up the intercom again and gave orders to all armored units. Pay attention to the formation and don't get too close. Hurry up, tanks, and don't hide behind. You are the most important firepower fulcrum. Infantry tank coordination. Infantry tank coordination. Idiots. Didn't I tell you to hide next to the tanks? Aren't you afraid of being shot to death by the heavy machine guns? Infantry company, stand back. Get vision from the sides and rear. Attack the enemy infantry. Don't let them launch suicide attacks. Rocket launchers. Rocket launchers, retreat. Reload and attack the artillery positions behind the enemy. What do you mean you can't see? Blind shooting. Blind shooting. This series of complex and precise instructions undoubtedly demonstrated Connor's command ability and his keen intuition on the battlefield. There is no doubt that he is an excellent commander. This is not just self-praise. In fact, on today's battlefield, this is the common conclusion reached by the participants. The advantage of the Burmese army is not only due to the assault of the armored company, but also due to the coordination of artillery vehicles and infantry and artillery. Being able to launch such a surprise attack under the circumstances of low command efficiency and low personnel quality is absolutely unique in the entire Pubei. The 2 regimental combat units of the 756th Brigade were losing ground and had lost more than 10% of their troops. But to Connor's surprise, this army had not collapsed yet. Maybe there is something holding them up. Maybe it was interest. Maybe it was belief. Maybe it was news of reinforcements. But it was meaningless. The reinforcements were destined to not arrive. Connor was very confident that he would only need another 5 minutes at most to end the fight completely. After defeating the 756th Brigade, the unit that is still in Dabin will be the next target. It's all about to end. Connor smiled. He really wanted to meet the commander of the Dongfeng Corps and say something to him. You didn't expect that I would defeat you in this way, but I probably won't have this opportunity, because that mercenary group was destined to be overwhelmed by heavy firepower. Looking at the collapse of the 756th Brigade's defense line, Connor was keenly aware of the changes on the battlefield. So, he gave the order without hesitation. Attack with all forces and defeat them. In an instant, all our troops were mobilized. Their speed suddenly increased, and they rushed towards the enemy. Victory was just a blink of an eye. But in this blink of an eye, a scene that could never happen suddenly appeared in front of Connor's eyes. Several tongues of fire rushed towards the tank in the front, and then a loud explosion sounded. The tank's fragile top armor was penetrated, and within just a few seconds, dazzling sparks of the explosion sprayed out. Is this an anti-tank missile? Connor was confused. But even more confusing things are yet to come. From behind that low hill, rockets continued to be fired. Mixed in with this were the traces of tracer bullets streaking through the sky. Connor was very familiar with this scene. Warthog? His body froze in place, but he quickly came to his senses. It couldn't be a warthog. This propeller sound is from Me-8. No, it's me, 171SH. Connor's eyes were bloodshot. His hand holding the walkie-talkie was shaking, and his tone became hoarse. Retreat! All armored units retreat. They have helicopters. They have fucking gunships. Retreat to the anti-aircraft artillery cover. Quickly. However, no matter how he shouted, it was too late. A large, clumsy-looking helicopter turned the mountain pass with great agility, and then passed over the heads of the attacking armored company at an astonishingly low altitude. Rockets were sprayed out densely, and Connor recognized that it was the C-5 unique to a certain country. Small size, low power. They could attack light armored units and launch top-penetrating attacks, but it was not enough. The ground had turned into a sea of fire. In a blink of an eye, more than 6 armored vehicles were blown into charred wreckage. The helicopter turned around with an unpretentious pull-up and emergency stop and flew towards the ground armor company again. At this time, Connor had only one thought in his mind. Finished. At this moment, he deeply felt the despair of those ground forces who were once dominated by the Apache. Our first phase of the mission has been completed. Next, we have to continue to observe the movements of the Shadow Corps and wait for the next move of the 7th Brigade and the 756th Brigade. This helicopter raid was a great success. According to the battle report from the 756th Brigade, we destroyed a total of 11 armored vehicles, including a tank. This is a major blow to the strength of the Myanmar army in Kangtung. Now, they have basically lost the ability to penetrate from the inside. Our actions were decisive, resolute, and effective. Of course, this was inseparable from the heroic fighting of the crew members. Inside the command room of the villa, Chen Chen looked at me, 171 crew members who had just rushed back, their faces still smelling of gunpowder, but their expressions were extremely excited and even happy, and an indescribable complex expression emerged on his face. He really wanted to go through the normal process, praise these pilots, and then give them some value. But the problem is that these people's reactions are completely different from what he expected. There is no sense of righteousness or selfless dedication, but only the excitement after a great fight, or even satisfaction. So you are here to have fun, right? After more than 10 years of retirement, is it time to finally eat meat? No wonder Xiaoyu picked out you guys. So, when she said very similar to me, she meant this aspect? However, no matter what, the role played by this helicopter airstrike was indeed huge. In the absence of theater air defense capabilities, the treetop killer is devastating to ground units. According to Chung Lei's report, under the guidance of the new fire control radar, they destroyed 4 light armored units in just one crossing, and destroyed another 4 after adjusting the direction. The whole process only takes 2 minutes. After these 2 minutes, the Burmese armored group completely collapsed. They were only concerned with escaping and were unable to organize an effective counterattack. Of course, those who were carrying RPGs and 40mm rifles and firing wildly did not count. In a real battlefield, if you want to destroy a helicopter with an RPG, you probably only have a chance when it is hovering, taking off, or landing. So you want to hit a helicopter that is maneuvering at high speed? That's no different than trying to catch a fly by spitting. The RPGs, flying all over the sky, did not pose any threat to the helicopter at all. At best, they just served as an atmosphere group and set off fireworks to celebrate the harvest of me. 171sh. In the final stage of the raid, the helicopters calmly used precision firepower to finally take out 3 armored vehicles. Just as Chung Lei said at the beginning, they only set off to return after they had used up all their rockets and large-caliber machine guns and were unable to cause any substantial damage. After they returned, the 756th Brigade had already begun organizing a counterattack, preparing to retake the frontline positions. This was a great victory, an absolutely overwhelming victory, won in an extremely dangerous situation with the advantage of equipment. It wasn't just the helicopters. In the final stage of pursuit, soldiers from the 756th Brigade wearing heavy bulletproof vests rushed into the battlefield and chased the fleeing Burmese soldiers all over the mountains. Those soldiers didn't even have bulletproof vests, let alone carrying gear. After losing the cover of the armored vehicles, they were really no different from lambs to be slaughtered in front of the heavily armored soldiers. In one round of counterattack, more than 200 Burmese soldiers were killed and more than 300 were captured. This number may not sound large, but in fact, it has reached 1/10 of the entire Jingdong garrison. It can only be said that it is fortunate that the Jingdong Myanmar Border Defense Brigade has this big city as its support. Otherwise, after paying such a high price in casualties, if it were a field combat environment, the entire army would have collapsed. The results of the battle were great, and the credit was great. So, what needs to be said still needs to be said. So, after a brief pause of a few seconds, Chen Chen continued. Taking into account the dangers and difficulties faced by the helicopter crews in this operation, we will slightly increase the share of the crew members when distributing the spoils in the future as an encouragement. Hearing his words, Chung Lei immediately raised his hand and said, "Commander, there is no need. Our operation this time is not very dangerous. It is really just like taking a walk." Haha, the Burmese are even weaker than we expected. They haven't even had basic training to deal with airstrikes, let alone organize air defense in the theater. I think if we have enough ammunition, this helicopter can even flatten the entire Shan state. Chung Lei's words were somewhat exaggerated. After all, the Myanmar army did not really have no air defense or air combat capabilities. They still had many helicopters and jet fighters. However, judging from the strength and resources they have shown in Jingdong and North and South Shan states, Chung Lei's judgment is indeed not exaggerated. So, Chen Chen said, when a new piece of equipment that breaks the battlefield pattern appears on the battlefield for the first time, the damage it can cause must be huge. The current helicopters, the future stealth fighters, and the small drones after that will all surely achieve significant results when they appear on the battlefield. However, our enemies will also learn. After this, I am afraid it will be difficult for us to seize the opportunity to use helicopters to carry out airstrikes recklessly. Yes, that's true. Chung Lei nodded slowly. At this moment, he found an extremely familiar feeling in Chen Chen. What does it mean to despise the enemy strategically and take the enemy seriously tactically? Isn't this a typical example? No wonder the organization, the company, would arrange these people for me here. It turns out they are really our own people. After a brief pause, he continued. So, in fact, our results this time were not great enough. At least 5 enemy armored vehicles escaped, and we were short of ammunition and failed to complete the pursuit. No need for rewards. We will consider how to optimize ammunition management later. Of course, the shortcomings in this battle were mainly caused by our misjudgment of the enemy. If we had known that they were so weak, we could have done it. Don't talk about that. Chen Chen waved his hand to interrupt Cheng Lei's speech and said, "The situation on the battlefield is ever-changing, and it is impossible to pursue perfection. Our combat philosophy is to be cautious and to preserve the manpower as much as possible. You must remember this." "Clear." Cheng Lei replied immediately without saying anything more, and after a little thought, Chen Chen continued to make subsequent arrangements. At this point, the situation we are facing is clear. On the two fronts north of Jingdong and east of Mingxiu, the 7th Brigade has reached a stalemate with the Myanmar side. In the short term, there is a high probability that there will be no more fierce clashes between the two sides. At the same time, the two combat regiments of the 756th Brigade have bypassed Jingdong from the west, joined the defenders originally located on the west side, and began to move to the south of Jingdong. They will set up a defense line in the Palau area, block all routes in and out of Kingtung, and formally form a siege on Kingtung. The most likely battle to break out next is in the Palau area. At present, the attitude of the 505th Brigade is still unclear, but we have reason to believe that they will stand up and join forces with the Myanmar army in the short term, and work together with the Jingdong Border Defense Brigade to put pressure on the 756th Brigade. The 756th Brigade is likely to be caught in a pincer attack. Without the support of other brigades in northern and southern Shan states, the risks they face are enormous. Won't the other brigades come to support? Isn't the southern Shan state's 757th Brigade near Monban? Bai Go raised his hand to interrupt and raised his own doubts. Before Chen Chen could answer, Shi Dakai spoke first. "It is impossible for any brigade in southern Shan state to come forward to help either side. They will just wait and see. It's a simple truth. They can't know who will win, so they can't take the risk. To put it bluntly, they will help whoever wins. So to get support, you must win the battle first. As for northern Shan state, that's even more unnecessary. Apart from the 7th Brigade, the other teams are so far away that we can't help even if we want to." "Understood." The white dog nodded slowly, paused for a moment, and then said thoughtfully, "From the perspective of total military strength, the 756th Brigade plus the 7th Brigade can barely tie with the Jingdong Border Defense Brigade. But if the 505th Brigade turns against us, it will be hard to say." Zhao Jiaoyang is said to have nearly 4,000 men under his command. Even if only 2,000 are allocated, it will be a huge pressure. "What did you say before? Just rely on the 756th Brigade to handle it on its own?" "That's right." Chen Chen nodded without hesitation and replied, "They can only do it themselves. On the Palau defense line, the 756th Brigade will deploy about 2,500 people. These 2,500 people have artillery support and a small number of motorized troops. In theory, their combat effectiveness is still quite strong. As long as they divide their forces to defeat the reinforcements of the 505th Brigade first, and then turn around and hold down the Burmese troops leaving Kingtung, they will basically be able to win." Chen Chen said it lightly, but to others, it sounded incredible. 2,500 people, you should leave at least 2,000 to defend, right? That is to say, it takes 2,000 people to devour 2,000 people, and then the remaining team has to turn around and block the attack of 2,000 to 3,000 people. The 756th Brigade is not the Dongfeng Corps. How can they do it? Everyone's face was full of doubts, except for Cheng Lei's group. Because in their opinion, isn't this the most basic operation? They don't even know what others are worried about. If you can't even win with a 1-to-1 ratio of troops, then what use are you? But as they had just arrived, they didn't understand the situation and didn't feel comfortable asking questions, so they could only sit there quietly, waiting for Chen Chen's explanation. Chen Chen also saw the concerns of the crowd, so he stopped keeping them in suspense and said directly, "The 756th Brigade will be in trouble, so we have to help them. We need to complete 2 decapitation operations. The first one was a beheading of the Burmese Army's command center in Kingtung. We all have serious suspicions that the Burmese Army's assault in Wampai was directed by a third party, in other words, the Shadow Army. Then, such commands and assistance will continue to appear. We must cut off this momentum. That is to say, we have to find a way to defeat the Shadow Army from a distance during the confrontation." Having said this, Chen Chen paused for a moment, and after seeing that no one had any objections, he continued. "The second time was the beheading of the 505th Brigade. We need to kill Zhao Jiaoyang and cut off his remote command. Is there no objection to these 2 goals?" "No." All the team members answered in unison, and Chen Chen nodded with satisfaction. Naturally, the meeting began to enter the stage of specific deployment. At the same time, in Jingdong City, in an inconspicuous but extremely sturdy low-rise building, Connor was sitting in a chair, treating his scratched forearm with alcohol and iodine. There is no doubt that he is lucky. Being able to survive the pursuit of a quasi-armed helicopter is considered a lucky person in any way. But at the same time, he was also extremely unlucky. Because the battle situation he had created with great difficulty and the opportunity to solve the problem once and for all with great difficulty were crushed by a helicopter. It seemed that he had underestimated his opponent. It is impossible for the 7th Brigade to have helicopters, let alone the 756th Brigade. The only one who could get the helicopters was the Dongfeng Corps. The Dongfeng Corps whose background was unclear but extremely conspicuous. Connor didn't think about where the helicopter came from, because he knew that there was no point in tracking such a thing. If someone can use it on the battlefield, it means that the equipment must be clean. In this case, what's the point of arguing and questioning about this kind of thing? It's better to think about how to restrain the helicopter suppression of oneself in the future battle. The importance of anti-aircraft firepower has risen to a new level, and one's own anti-aircraft guns must be modified, or at least transformed into mobile anti-aircraft vehicles with a certain degree of mobility. In addition to this, tactical choices must be made more carefully, and attempts to launch surprise attacks are no longer possible because the enemy support will arrive much faster. Then you can only proceed step by step, or achieve victory by surprise. Connor's brow furrowed. The power he can use is too little. Although the Shadow Corps is still a special operations force, it is really impossible to rely on them to turn the situation around, because your enemies are not weak either. But it's not a good idea to keep this team in the city. It would be a huge waste of resources. Perhaps we should try and at least find a way to solve the problem of Brigade 756? According to preliminary intelligence, the command center of the 756th Brigade is still deployed in Mengbin, which is only a few dozen kilometers away from Jingdong. Although all roads out of the city have been blocked, that only applies to vehicles and large-scale combat forces. It's not a big problem for a small force to infiltrate and sneak out of the city. Thinking of this, Connor waved to the adjutant waiting on the side, and then said, "Help me call everyone over. I want to discuss tactics. I want to destroy the command center of the 756th Brigade. The main force must cooperate with my actions. If this decapitation is successful, our chances of winning will be greatly improved." The Shadow Corps' affairs are not easy to deal with. Munka, in the living room of the villa, Shi Dakai sat opposite Chen Chen and said with a slightly worried tone. He had already read the latest intelligence sent back by Sang Yi. The information in the intelligence showed that the Shadow Legion's recent activities had dropped to the lowest point. They seemed to have made up their minds to lie low in the most low-key manner and survive this Jingdong crisis. The most obvious manifestation of this trend is that no one has come in or out of the Shadow Corps' office for a long time, and those locations where Shadow Corps mercenaries were previously known to often appear are no longer seen. Sang Yi has actually lost surveillance of the target. Although he is still trying and groping, it is indeed unlikely to reconnect the broken line. All he could do was to follow Chen Chen's instructions and try to get as much information as possible about the Shadow Legion's allies. For example, the businesses they cooperate with, the military officers they often interact with, and even the restaurants they often order meals from, and the logistics and express delivery companies they use. In Shi Dakai's view, this is actually a useless effort that is better to do than not to do. It is actually extremely difficult for the Dongfeng Corps to complete the decapitation of the Shadow Corps, especially to destroy its core command center. The difficulty is not in the act of fighting itself, but in not finding the person. After hearing his words, Chen Chen nodded helplessly. He said, "There is nothing we can do about this. Our opponents are not fools. They know exactly what is the safest way to play under the current circumstances. Now that the lights have been turned off across Shan State, those who hide in the dark naturally have a huge advantage. After all, what we did to them was just monitoring, not infiltration. It's actually quite good that Sanji could do this and determine that their activities were abnormal." Shi Dakai nodded slightly, and after thinking for a moment, he suddenly asked, "If we had sent Jiang He over at the beginning, would the situation have been better?" It's impossible. No matter how strong Jiang He is, he can't infiltrate the Shadow Corps in such a short time. Even if he infiltrates, it can only involve some peripheral departments. Essentially, this doesn't change our situation. Really? Shi Dakai sighed softly and asked again. "What about the bodies? Is there anything we can do? For example, we can take the initiative to send the bodies back. They won't take the bait. This is too sensitive a time. Everyone is scared. So there is absolutely no way? Then how do we carry out the beheading?" Chen Chen leaned back on the sofa, spread his hands, and said, "There's really no other way. War is not only about equipment, but more importantly, information. What we lack most now is actually information. I propose the beheading plan not because I'm sure I can do it, but because we have to do it under the current circumstances. But whether there is an opportunity is another matter. To be honest, I don't think they will give us a chance. They may launch a decapitation operation against the 7th Brigade or the 756th Brigade like we did. But even if we can take advantage of their tactic and destroy their peripheral combat teams, we won't be able to damage their foundation. On the contrary, it may make them more vigilant and completely destroy that slight chance. Then we can only wait and see if there are any new opportunities? Yes, we can only wait." As soon as Chen Chen finished speaking, Shi Dakai also fell silent. He thought over and over, but he really couldn't find any flaws in the Shadow Legion, nor could he think of a way to force them to show up. "We should not have attacked Banglong before," he said thoughtfully. "How could we have predicted this? When we were fighting Banglong, we had no idea that Wa State would be ready to launch such a big move so soon. People cannot be omniscient and omnipotent. We must learn to accept the changes in things." Chen Chen's expression was calm, and his tone was relaxed, as if the current difficulties were not worth mentioning to him. Looking at Chen Chen's expression, Shi Dakai suddenly felt that something in his heart had changed. There is absolutely no doubt that he has always been a pessimist. As a pessimist, the most typical characteristic is not pessimism itself, but the so-called desire for control. He wants to control everything in his own hands and hopes that everything will go according to his wishes. If there is a possibility of risk in something, he will eliminate the root cause of the risk at all costs. This is contradictory because the options he chooses to eliminate risk often appear very radical. However, this is not contradictory, because no matter how radical the plan is, it is essentially caused by the kind of pessimism that cannot be erased. For a long time, he felt that he was very similar to Chen Chen, the leader who had led him all the way. Both the way of doing things and the direction of judging things were surprisingly consistent, which made him think that Chen Chen was also a pessimist. But today, he suddenly realized that this was not the case. Chen Chen was just cautious, thoroughly cautious. But he is not pessimistic. He can accept his loss of control very smoothly and is extremely confident that he can get things back on track under any out-of-control conditions. This seems to be the mentality we should have when facing difficulties. Do I need to be so pessimistic? Isn't it true that the Dongfeng Corps' success again and again is not enough to give him basic confidence in this team? In an instant, Shi Dakai suddenly understood. Yes, there is no need to be so anxious. What is there to worry about? If we can't defeat the Shadow Army, can they defeat us? Isn't the stalemate that Chen Chen exchanged for a few corpses still over? Excluding all the superficial interference factors, the essence of the matter has not changed at all. So really just wait? Waiting patiently is one of the most critical parts of a hunt. Shi Dakai felt that the haze in his heart dissipated instantly, and even his thoughts became clearer. His brain was working rapidly, and after a moment, he came to a conclusion he had never imagined before. We don't actually want to defeat the Shadow Legion. We do want to physically destroy them, but in fact, destroying them is not our fundamental purpose. Our goal is to declare our rule over this territory and to use their destruction to deter the forces behind the Shadow Legion who want to get involved. So, we have to fight the Shadow Legion, but not just them. Attack the enemy and then rescue them. This is the coalition's thinking, and this is also our thinking. I know what you're waiting for. Chen Chen looked at Shi Dakai with a little surprise and said, "Tell me about it." Shi Dakai took a deep breath and replied, "You are waiting for a split to occur within Jingdong. You're going to put pressure on them from the outside and force the allies of the Shadow Corps to defect. I finally understand why you want to get involved in the big event of Hua State taking over Jingdong. Your target is not the Shadow Army at all. To put it bluntly, it's Wenbang and the CIA. I see. You had no intention of competing with them at all. You were just borrowing the power of the coalition forces. You are still the fox that is relying on the power of the tiger. However, everyone thinks that the coalition forces are the foxes and you are the tiger. You just want to tell their financial backers that if they dare to make a move, you dare to turn the table over. Brother Chen, you really are my brother." This time, Chen Chen was really surprised. He didn't expect that Shi Dakai could actually understand this. This was indeed something he had planned a long time ago, but in fact, before Shi Dakai, the only one who truly guessed his intention was Xiaoyu. This is why Xiaoyu repeatedly told him, "This is not your business." What Xiaoyu meant was not taking Jingdong is not your business, but overturning the table is not your business. The same reason applies to why Xiaoyu repeatedly emphasizes that you can only utilize but not dominate. Chen Chen promised Xiaoyu and actually did it. However, he always believed that it was time to overturn the table. It is normal for Xiaoyu to have concerns. After all, flipping the table is too obvious. But in the final analysis, she still left a green light. That is to turn the Dongfeng Corps into an offshore company. If Chen Chen really overturns the table, then after the matter is over, Dongfeng PMC will not be Pubei PMC, but an international PMC group. Only in this way can the harmless rabbit truly shift the blame for the unruly bad deed of turning the table to other forces. Because just as Chen Chen said, internationalization means out of control and decoupling. The main line of everything has actually been clear for a long time, but Chen Chen did not mention it to anyone. But now, Shi Dakai thought of it himself, and he thought of more. So, Xiaoyu has reached a consensus? No, she doesn't want us to pretend to be tigers. Chen Chen sighed and continued. But if we are determined to impersonate her, she will help us deal with it. Understood. Shi Dakai nodded slowly and continued. So it's right to use mulberry leaves instead of Ginger River, because Ginger River is really not needed. We don't need too much information anyway, so Sang Ye's level is enough. He is even safer. No wonder you asked Sang Yi to collect the alliance information of the Shadow Corps. This is what you were waiting for. At this point, Shi Dakai scratched his head and asked in confusion. So what is the signal? Are they really waiting for them to carry out the beheading? That's right. Chen Chen nodded seriously and replied. We must make the decapitation happen, because such an operation cannot be accomplished by the Shadow Corps alone. They definitely need support in terms of equipment, funding, and intelligence. And all this support was provided by their allies. To put it bluntly, we're not going to catch them. We told them to fight Hibangxiu. We will fight whenever they do. The difference is that they want to behead people, and we want to settle accounts. This may not be a kind of decapitation, Shi Dakai said thoughtfully. Liquidation, amputation, turning into human pigs. What is eliminated is not them, but their influence. The communication between Shi Dakai and Chen Chen was not heard by a third party, not because of distrust, but because Chen Chen felt that such a complicated conspiracy did not need to be used to occupy other people's time. As a mercenary, why do you have to make yourself so hard? Just fight the war honestly and seriously. As for the high difficulty, high IQ confrontation, just leave it to Chen Chen. However, there may be another choice in the future, that is Shi Dakai. His growth rate is really fast. From the most cowardly and useless one in the team more than a year ago, he has evolved into the most likely second in command of the Dongfeng Corps. Chen Chen was quite satisfied with this, so he simply explained the plan to Shi Dakai and authorized him to carry out the subsequent specific task arrangements. This was a test, and Shi Dakai did not disappoint Chen Chen. The plan he worked out was almost identical to what Chen Chen had envisioned. He first notified Hibangxiu to strengthen internal security and asked him to immediately arrange a substitute while he hid and gave remote commands. This is to prevent Hibangxiu from really encountering misfortune during the Shadow Corps' decapitation operation, and to ensure that the decapitation operation can proceed smoothly. Secondly, he decided to strengthen the mulberry leaves. With the help of a night feint attack by the 756th Brigade, he arranged for Bao Qi, Aijiao, and Yang Shu to infiltrate Jingdong. And with the support of Sang Yi, they successfully hid themselves, forming a four-man combat team. Although this team does not have sufficient weapons and equipment, and the 4 people can only get together 2 submachine guns and 2 pistols, but Bao Qi has learned the true skills of Chen Chen in making certain things. Sure, Dakai fully believes that he can complete some relatively difficult goals in the future with the help of limited conditions. Once again, he used the intelligence that Sang Yi had obtained to make a list in advance and develop a series of combat plans, ready to implement them once the time was right. Finally, he asked Chen Chen to contact Bao Xiaomei, He Bangxiong, He Bupa, and others to start organizing public opinion propaganda to pave the way for some actions that might seem unreasonable in the future. At this point, all preparations have been completed. All the Dongfeng Corps has to do is wait. On the 5th day after the 756th Brigade and the 7th Brigade completed the deployment of defenses on the Wanpai and Palau lines, cut off Jingdong's external contact routes, and completely completed the siege, the Shadow Corps' first wave of counterattack arrived as expected. The 756th Brigade's command post was attacked, and He Bangxiong was rumored to be dead. Afterwards, the real He Bangxiong stepped forward to command a relatively large-scale revenge war, announcing his presence to all forces and revealing the identity of the attackers. Shadow Corps. At this moment, all conditions are ripe. Sure Dakai received Chen Chen's order, and the Dongfeng Corps began to move. There is a long list of names on the list, and according to Sure Dakai's plan, all of these names will be crossed out within 1 day. 6 hours later, Wanpai. Chen Chen stood behind 3 KH-179 155mm howitzers, directing the artillerymen under He Bangxiong to set the firing parameters of the 3 cannons. He carefully confirmed the data over and over again, striving to ensure that in the case of cold cannon shooting, the 3 shells to be fired would hit the target on the first try. He Bangxiong, who was standing aside, watched his actions with curiosity and awe. His current thoughts were no different from those of He Bupa before. It could even be said that his feelings were even stronger than He Bupa's before, because he saw the entire process of Chen Chen from arranging the artillery position, to the artillery reconnaissance going forward to confirm the target, to the feedback of various data, and to the reverse calculation to obtain the firing parameters of the artillery position. This was simply like a miracle to him. Or rather, it could not be called a miracle, but rather it was some kind of supreme war technology that he could never achieve. He was able to understand the principles of this technology, and even more so its value, and it was precisely because of this that he became more aware of the preciousness of the technology. Seeing that Chen Chen had already adjusted all the artillery, he hurried forward and asked Chen Chen respectfully, "Captain Chen, are these 3 guns set up? Can we guarantee a hit on the first shot?" Hearing his words, Chen Chen shook his head and replied, "It's all set up, but whether you can hit it in the first shot is another matter. Wind, humidity, air pressure. Any slight change in any of these data could affect the trajectory. So without weather reconnaissance, no one can guarantee that the artillery fire will accurately hit the target. However, our current artillery range is not that far, only 17 kilometers. Theoretically, it is still possible to maintain an accuracy of less than 5 meters. Anyway, we are not looking for a one-shot kill, but a greater intention of deterrence. In this case, this accuracy is barely acceptable." He Bangxiong opened his mouth in astonishment. He actually couldn't quite understand what Chen Chen meant by barely usable. At a distance of 17 kilometers, the landing point of the shell is accurately controlled within 5 meters. And then you tell me that this is barely usable? Sure enough, the gap between people is even greater than that between people and dogs. The gap between artillery pieces is so huge that it is incomprehensible. There is no need to ask further. If there is another chance after this battle, perhaps I can ask this commander for advice. If they could learn even a little bit, it would be enough for their artillery to dominate this land, right? Thinking of this, He Bangxiong immediately put away his slightly overstepping curiosity and asked, "Captain Chen, we have a total of 11 targets to destroy this time. Are you sure we don't need to organize a feint attack to cover the operation? After all, it's quite difficult to take down so many targets at the same time. If the situation changes, it's easy to miss one." Looking at his somewhat cautious expression, Chen Chen smiled and shook his head. He could certainly understand He Bangxiong's thoughts. Simply put, he misunderstood this anti-traitor operation as an annihilation operation. He probably really thought that Chen Chen was doing this to avenge himself, or to carry out equal revenge on the Shadow Legion. Since it was revenge, it would definitely ensure casualties. But in fact, Chen Chen's idea was completely different from what he expected. After thinking for a moment, Chen Chen asked, "Do you know why the Americans dare not attack North Korea?" He Bangxiong was stunned for a moment and replied, "I am afraid of you guys. If I were the commander of the Americans, I wouldn't dare to fight either. There is no other example in the world of using light infantry to kill or even annihilate a group of heavy firepower and heavy armor. And that was decades ago. If we do it now, won't we be courting death?" Chen Chen expected what he said, but this was not what he really wanted to say. So, Chen Chen said, "This is one reason. It's not because they are afraid of being beaten, it's simply because of the checks and balances of power among the major powers. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is North Korea's own methods. They actually rely on one sentence to restrain the United States, which is, if you hit me, I will hit South Korea. And now, our thinking is the same. The Shadow Corps' survival in Jingdong must rely on the political and economic soil here. Without these, they will quickly die and rot. We can't uproot them because their roots are too deep to be completely removed. Well, let's not dig at all, let's just dig the soil. If the Shadow Army attacks you, you should attack their financial backers and partners. If it doesn't hurt once, hit me a few more times until I can't bear it anymore. Wouldn't the result be obvious in the long run? I don't believe those businessmen and politicians can hold out for long. The reason they wanted to cooperate before was nothing more than the benefits promised by the Shadow Army. NPRI, CIA, and the Americans. Then, as long as we can cause them more damage than they might gain, won't everything be solved naturally? Bongxiong's eyes widened in surprise, but soon he nodded in sudden realization. I see. It doesn't matter who we hit, and it doesn't matter whether we hit them to death or not, but our attitude when we hit them is important. Yes, very insightful. Chen Chen nodded with satisfaction, then raised his arm and looked at the hands of his watch. In 80 minutes, the anti-traitor operation in Jingdong City will be launched. Until this time, those people who were about to face disaster still knew nothing about their fate. In Jingdong City, Bao Qi assembled the last IED and carefully put it into the suitcase. He then zipped up the suitcase and switched the simple firing safety to the on position. Then, he handed the IED to Sang Yi, who had been waiting on the side, and said to him, "The IED must be deployed as covertly as possible so that no one can see any abnormality. For example, if this missile is covered by a suitcase, you must ensure that you leave the suitcase at the last minute. Otherwise, it will arouse suspicion. You can just throw this trash bag bomb at the target's door. Also, you are responsible for detonating the explosion. You must pay attention to the surrounding situation and make sure not to hurt innocent people. It is certainly true that the people we want to kill are all heinous criminals, but if we cause civilian casualties in the process, then the significance and deterrent effect of this operation will be greatly reduced. Remember, we are not trying to carry out a terrorist attack, but to eliminate traitors. If there is no good opportunity, we would rather not have this explosion. Clear?" Sang Yi nodded decisively, and then asked, "What about you? Have you arranged your own entry and exit routes?" "It's all arranged." Yang Shu at the side took over the conversation and replied, "The target is relatively simple, and the defense is very lax. There were less than 4 defenders at each of the 2 targets, and they had no bulletproof vests. The short guy and I will each take charge of one. We will fire at close range, throw smoke bombs, and then run away." "Where's the smoke bomb?" Sang Yi continued to ask. "Here." Bao Qi took out 4 plastic bottles from a backpack beside him and introduced them. "We added potassium nitrate, sugar, coffee powder, paraffin, and black powder. In theory, the smoke generation rate is still very fast, but there is no place to test it. We can only throw 1 more per person to make room for error. Be careful. Bring your windproof lighter with you, otherwise you won't be able to light a fire at a critical moment. That would be nonsense." "Clear." Yang Shu nodded solemnly and asked again, "What about you? Leading a helicopter attack, is that risky?" "Theoretically, it's not high. I'm just responsible for setting off fireworks. The main thing is that the range of fireworks is relatively short, so we need to evacuate quickly. The real risk is still the helicopter itself. There are 2 anti-aircraft guns in the city that have been converted into mobile ones, which makes it difficult to evade them. If there is no chance at that time, I will just order the helicopter to withdraw." Having said this, Bao Qi paused for a few seconds, and then reminded, "You must keep the issue of evacuation in mind. After the operation is completed, immediately abandon all weapons and equipment and hide. Jingdong is very big. We can't find a shadow corps, and they can't find us either. Being unarmed and disguised as a civilian is the safest option. Don't feel bad about your equipment, and don't take chances. Just stay hidden and wait for the follow-up support from the 756th Brigade." "Clear." Everyone nodded in unison, and then Bao Qi also raised his hand and looked at his watch. 70 minutes, let's go. Be safe. See you in 2 hours." West of Jingdong, in a valley near Rishutang, Cheng Lei was hovering above the treetops in his Mi-171sh. Under the influence of the ground effect, it became extremely difficult to control the helicopter, but Cheng Lei relied on his superb skills to control the aircraft steadily at a height of less than 5 meters from the ground. The not-too-high mountains blocked the helicopter's radar signal, and the dense trees absorbed the noise of the rotating blades. They were quietly waiting for the opportunity, waiting to use the remaining few C-5 rockets and 12.7mm heavy machine guns on the helicopter to accurately harvest the life of the most important and critical target. Cheng Lei knew that his action this time might not be successful, and he also knew that his first task was to protect the helicopter, but in his heart he never gave up the idea of successfully striking with 1 strike. It is certainly difficult, but not that difficult. It flew low along the valley, advanced to the vicinity of Jingdong City, then fired a round of rockets according to the instructions of the fireworks, bypassed the firing range of the enemy's anti-aircraft guns, and returned to Palau from the south. The key to the entire mission is not driving skills or weapons and equipment, but time difference. And it just so happened that according to past battle examples, the team he followed was extremely good at seizing time differences. It will succeed. Cheng Lei let out a sigh of relief, looked at the time clearly, and made an okay gesture to the passenger seat. Then, without any pause, he gently pulled the joystick, and the helicopter raised its head at an extremely gentle angle and swooped down the valley towards the Jingdong City in the distance. The battle broke out when everyone was caught off guard, and all the raids occurred almost at the same time. South of Jingdong City, the Myanmar Border Defense Brigade camp near the suburbs was hit by 6 consecutive 155mm artillery shells. Even though they had dispersed the camp with extreme caution, the 6 shells still killed more than 4 senior officers due to the effective shooting with an accuracy of even less than 2 meters. Smoke and gusts of air swept across the entire camp, and everyone was fleeing in panic. The situation was exactly the same as it was at the Munku camp. Immediately afterwards, explosions occurred in front of 2 business houses in Jingdong City. The explosive power of the homemade IED mixed with broken steel pieces was not very great, but because the bomb was placed very close, after the explosion, the 3 bosses who had just finished a coordination meeting and had just rushed back to the company were all knocked to the ground. The fragments penetrated their bodies, bringing out puffs of blood. Before they could even make a groan, they fainted because of the instinctive protection mechanism triggered by the intense pain. They may not necessarily die, but they will definitely not be able to live satisfactorily anymore. At the same time, after the explosion, the two local administrative officials subconsciously began to flee to their safe house. But what they didn't expect was that just as they were away from the crowd and away from the attackers who might emerge from the crowd, two figures holding MP5, K, and Micro Uzi, respectively suddenly blocked their evacuation route. After a round of shooting, the two men immediately dropped their guns and pulled out their pistols, shooting the security guards who had fallen to the ground one by one. Only after they were sure that everyone was still did they coldly and decisively fire their last bullets at the target's head. There were no unnecessary movements and no chance of survival for the target. After doing all this, the two gunmen threw smoke bombs and then disappeared completely in the smoke. In the direction they left, one colorful firework after another exploded in the slightly gloomy sky. Following the direction of the fireworks, a helicopter flew past almost close to the roof of the building and poured several rockets into the inconspicuous windows of the building indicated by the fireworks. The people who were evacuating inside were blown to pieces. He had just put on his bulletproof vest, and he never thought that what attacked him was not a fully armed special forces team, but a flaming helicopter. The helicopter used up its ammunition, and then turned at an astonishingly sharp angle, almost effortlessly catching the blind spots of several anti-aircraft guns and circling the anti-aircraft guns that were urgently turning their muzzles. When the muzzle finally pointed in the direction of the helicopter, it had already flown out of the city and turned into a small black dot. As the humming sound of the propeller faded away, Jingdong City fell into silence again. And in this silence, a total of 10 targets have been eliminated. The only target that was not attacked was because the roadside bomb was taken away as garbage. This goal was undoubtedly a lucky one, but he is also unfortunate, because in the coming period, he will be like all those who have contact with the Shadow Corps, trapped in endless fear.